Oh, wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hey, man, we're just gonna continue learning a little bit of the history of Halloween, some of the traditions attached to Halloween. We're gonna continue reading this book that we actually read from. I uploaded a video about 4 days ago, right? Halloween Origins, Samhain, Part 1. This is literally Part 1. So if you didn't watch this very informative video, you should watch it. If you haven't watched this very informative video, hold up, I'm not showing the screen, my fault. It's this one right here from 4 days ago, Halloween Origins, Samhain. All right. It's about an hour long, and we did a lot of good reading
Si
and
estás viendo esto,
a lot of good information when it comes to the origins of Halloween and some context and background, right? You know, we went over a lot of things, and I did skip a lot too from this book, so I want to get back into the book today. Pretty interesting read regarding certain things on Halloween. Okay, so again, this book is Trick or Treat, A History of Halloween, right? So welcome, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. We're gonna go ahead and go into, because we skipped this chapter completely. All right. Oh, actually, hold up. Before that, let's talk about bonfires. So this is from chapter 1, Halloween, the misunderstood festival, you know. Hey, come on now. Why is it so blurry? Oh yeah, they hating. Hold up, guys. They hating big time. All right. So chapter 1, Halloween, the misunderstood festival. We go to this part of chapter 1 when it comes to talking about bonfires. You guys know that's like a kind of like attached to Halloween, this tradition of bonfires and stuff. I mean, they've done it for many different reasons, right? But they seem to be popular around Halloween as well. All right, so we're going to read a little bit about the history of that. Okay. So welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate everybody in the live chat that is here on time. Please help me like and share the video so more people can come through. All right, so it says here bonfire night. In 1605, a human devil nearly drove a stake through Halloween's heart. In the early hours of the morning of the 5th of November, a Catholic gentleman named Guy Fawkes, or Guido, Guido, Guido Fawkes, as he'd come to call himself after a failed mission to secure Spanish support for English Catholics, was discovered beneath the House of Lords with 36 barrels of gunpowder. Although the plot had been organized largely by Robert Catesby, and involved around a dozen other conspirators, all Catholics unhappy with James I's attempt at suppressing their religion, it was Fox who would become the man most associated with the gunpowder plot. Fox, who was subjected to so much torture that he was literally unable to climb the gallows to his own execution, was hanged, drawn, and quartered on 31st of January, 1606. But his failed attempt at assassinating the king was far from forgotten. Earlier in January, Parliament had declared 5th of November a holiday forever in thankfulness to God for our deliverance and detestation of the papist. A Guy Fawkes Day Eve soon became one of the British calendar's most beloved festival. All right. It says here, Crispy Jean, the Paz the Elder, the gunpowder plot conspirators from 1606 engraven, right? It says for about 40 years, Guy Fawkes and Halloween existed peacefully side by side. The Poor Robin's Almanac of 1677 describes 5 November thus: Now, boys, with squibs and crackers play and bonfires blaze, turns night to day. A journal for 1629 of Bulstrode Whitelock, then a prominent young London lawyer, describes a festive Halloween evening with revelers bedecked and finery dancing at tavern until very late into the night. All that changed in 1647 when Parliament banned all festivals except Guy Fawkes. You guys here? Ever heard of this festival? Because of its close proximity to All Saints and All Souls Day, which we read on part one of this, right? Make sure to watch the video, the first one. It was really good information we got, the history of all this. So All Saints and All Souls Day, we went over that. On 1 and 2nd of November, the celebration of Guy Fawkes Day had already acquired many of the traditions that had formerly been associated with them. All right. So we have a part one of this from 4 days ago. Make sure you guys watch that if you missed it. I uploaded that video late and a lot of people have not watched it. All right. So it's a lot of good info on the origins of Halloween. So bonfires had been lit on 5th of November, 1605 to celebrate the king's deliverance. The eve is still often known as Bonfire Night. And that tradition would continue in some form or other to contemporary times. Young people worked weeks in advance to collect fuel for the great fires. And so house to house begging was involved. Sometimes the children even smeared their faces with charcoal and dressed in rags. They paint themselves black, listen, and dressed in rags, a sort of early ancestor of the 20th century American house to house begging ritual of trick or treat. Pranks that could evolve into vandalism might take place, just as they did in Irish and later American Halloweens. So we went over all these pranks and the history of all that involved in Halloween in part one, too. That's why I say you guys should definitely watch it if you haven't, right? In the British towns of Lewes, or Louis, which is famed for the grand Guy Fawkes festivities that still take place there every year, an attempt in 1779 to limit rowdiness by banning bonfires was met with threats of burning down houses instead. The bonfires, needless to say, were allowed to continue. Guy Fawkes Day, or night, soon became the preeminent autumn celebration throughout Great Britain. Celebrations varied from parish to parish. One of the most peculiar was found in Holderness, East Yorkshire, where boys used strips of leather to beat the church pews, but typically consisted of young people begging money for fireworks and gathering fuel for bonfires, as well as making an effigy of Fawkes, an idol, that would be thrown onto the flames, the Burning Man, So Burning Man is just like another Guy Fawkes festivity, Burning Man Festival, The typical brief solicitation was to beg a penny for the guy. But quite often the children engaged in a longer rhyming performance, of which many variations were recorded, including this version from Worcestershire, as noted down in 1892. Check it out. And it says here, burning the Pope in effigy at Temple Bar, London on Pope Night. Wow. They were burning the Pope, you see? This is probably Protestants, right? So don't you remember the 5th of November? Is gunpowder treason and plot? I don't see the reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. A stick and a stake for Queen Victoria's sake. I pray, Master, give us a F-A-G-G-O-T. I'm not saying that word because last time they demonetized my video for, even though we know it means a pile of sticks that you burn. That's what literally that word means, right? So I prayed, Master, give us a pile of sticks. If you don't give us one, we'll take two. The better for us and the worse for you. During this recital, the boys all thumped heavy sticks on the ground at the words plot, forgot, and F-A-G-G-O-T, all right? Pile of sticks. Adult celebrations took place in the evening and included lighting and supervising the bonfires. Although in some towns, tar barrels were lit and rolled into the nearest river. And Lewes bonfire societies also dress in costume and stage large-scale parades, still witnessed by thousands. Guy Fawkes Day also has his own foods. Bonfire parkin is a heavy cake, and bonfire toffee is made mostly from butter and black treacle. Guy Fawkes bonfires were popular until the 19th century, when practical consideration came into play in many areas. Hillsides had been so completely stripped of vegetation that very little fuel was available anymore. Nowadays, most British cities celebrate with a civic fireworks display and perhaps a parade. Guy Fawkes celebrations did eventually find their way west to America, with English settlers under the title Pope Night. However, American leaders in the Revolutionary War, including George Washington, the swarthy man, were opposed to the festival, since they feared the celebration might offend the religious sensibilities of their French allies. Of his French allies, he means his ancestors too. Remember, he had a Huguenot ancestor. He was French. Because why would it offend them? Because they're a lot of them are crypto Jews, crypto Muslims, so-called new Christians or converts, cryptos, right? Protestants. So they're not down with all that idol and all that stuff the Catholics are okay with, right? There's a lot of context there, right? So it says or there were still scattered celebrations reported in America until the end of the 19th century, though the festival had so much of its original meaning that the name had been degraded to Pork Night. Pork Night, huh? Wow, Pork Night. Continuing, it says here, Old Samhain and Martinmas. Remember, Samhain, we read this on part one, right? 4 days ago. Make sure to watch part one of this study right here, right? The history of Halloween, which we did 4 days ago. We know what Samhain does, like the Celtic, original so-called Halloween and what they were doing and how they practiced it, what they believed in. We went over that, right? So it says Old Samhain and Martinmas. So there's a whole other part that we haven't got into. It says in 1582 came an event that would, in some areas, lead to a second night of Halloween celebration. Pope Gregory the 13th signed the Gregorian calendar into effect. Wow, the hijack, huh? The old Julian calendar, which had been employed throughout Europe since 45 BC, had reckoned each year at 365.25 days, but led to an error of around 3 days per 4 centuries. This made calculating the date for Easter difficult since the spring equinox kept shifting, so the Catholic Church reformed the calendar. So their calendars were always off, and they're still off. The Maya and Olmec calendars, they were never off. They were always complement. The way they broke it down, they always included that extra so-called leap year or day or extra, right? Even though the Pope decreed the change in 1582, Martin Luther had begun the Protestant Reformation 65 years earlier. On the 31st of October, when he presented his 95 Theses. Oh, what a coincidence that he did that on the 31st of October, huh? And countries that had moved largely to Protestantism were slow to accept the new calendar. In Britain, it wasn't adopted until 1752, at which point the new calendar had accrued 11 days in error. Wow. Hijacks on hijacks. It says many inhabitants of Britain and Ireland were reluctant to adopt the new calendar, especially where their beloved festivals were concerned. In Ireland, though some inhabitants started to hold their Halloween revels on the 31st of October, others clung to the old calendar, meaning they now celebrated their Hallows Eve on 11th of November. Yet others created two celebrations referring to the 11th of November as Uichi-shon Samhain, Old Samhain Eve, and 12th of November of Loshon Samhain, Old Samhain Day. In what is now Northern Ireland, 12th of November was known as Old Hall Eve and was celebrated until the early 20th century with dancing and fortune telling, especially the burning of nuts. Fortunately, there was already a festival on the 11th of November, and soon Martinmas began to serve as a display's Halloween. Saint Martin, AD 317 and 397, supposedly, right, was the patron saint of the harvest. Oh, the harvest, huh? Not the Most High, not the Great Spirit. And the date of his observance, they may have been chosen to replace a great feast of Jupiter. Oh, that's why they added that. See how they changed their characters? He went from Jupiter to St. Martin, huh? They're celebrating Thoth, man. The Epulum Lo Iovis. just as All Saints Day replaced Samhain, just like All Saints Day replaced Samhain, Martinmas was celebrated around Europe and the British Isles, with many rituals similar to Halloween, including the settling of debts, weather customs, feasting, and merrymaking, meaning getting drunk, merrymaking, and some fortune telling. So again, in part one, we went over a lot of that Samhain tradition and what the Celts and Druids and these ancient people of the British Isles and Ireland were doing with these dates and the celebration. So make sure to get the context if you missed part one, okay? It says drinking, however, was also a major part of Martin Mass, all right? Drinking, so merrymaking, right? Merry Christmas, yeah, getting drunk, which in some areas even came to be known as Martinalia. Hiring fairs were especially popular on Martinmas, and it was also a tradition or traditional time for slaughtering livestock and laying in provisions against the coming winter. Martinmas faded considerably after cattle and pig production was industrialized and meat became plentiful throughout the year. Before, Bonfire Night was left as the principal autumn festival in England, but Halloween was still observed in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and on the Isle of Man, and not merely observed but celebrated with such mystery and revelry that neither religious nor political conflicts could dampen its spirit. All right, and we continue. We're on chapter 2 again. This is the book Trick or Treat, A History of Halloween. Big shout out, I'm sorry to forgot, to Lisa Morton, the author of this book. Big shout out to Lisa Morton. All right. Thank you for putting this information together for us. Fair use, educational purposes, critique and commentary. We're just here to learn. You like the book, go ahead and purchase it, support. It says Snap Apple Night, Chapter 2, and November Eve, Halloween in the British Isles. By the 16th century, Halloween, meaning the evening of the 31st of October, observed separately from All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, Guy Fawkes Day, Bonfire Night, and Martinmas, was starting to creep into both folklore and the calendar of festivals observed throughout the British Isles. In areas where the Celtic influence was still strong, mainly Ireland and Scotland, the festival continued to grow in popularity. Scotland especially clung to the night's aura of romance and ghostly doings, and the earliest mentions of Halloween and poetry all emanate from Scotland. The classic Scottish ballad, Tamlane, was first recorded in 1548 and relates the romantic and eerie story of Janet, a lass who becomes pregnant by Tamlane, a young man stolen by the fairies. Janet can rescue him only on Halloween night, provided she's able to hold on to him no matter what strange and frightening transformation the fairy queen puts the young man through. In 1584, Alexander Montgomery penned the whimsical Montgomery's Answer to Polwart, which includes these famous lines. In the hinder end of harvest, on All Hallow Even, when our good neighbors do right, if I read right, some buckled on bunwant and some on a bone, and trotting in troops from the twilight. Just over the 2 centuries later, the works of Sir Walter Scott would reveal much about the morbid imagination of the Scots. Here's an image. It says here Alison Gross from the English-Scottish popular ballads. In his minstrelsy, remember who was doing that? These was mainly melanated folks, black folks. Remember we read in the book Ancient and Modern Britain's the whole history of minstrelsy and who was doing that, right? And what they were described as looking. So in his A Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, 1802-1803, Scott collected ballads, including Tamlane, and in the lengthy introduction, he notes the superstitious nature of the Highlanders. The Highlanders, huh? A lot of your ancestors, the M border clans, who believed in fairies. They believed in fairies and witches, or are these real things, huh? carried spell books, uh-oh, and thought charms had the power to cure disease, uh-oh. Did they not keep the code? Scott's own work included references to Halloween too. In his novel The Monastery, there are mentions of Halloween fortune telling, encountering fetches or the apparitions of those not yet dead, and second sight, they that are born on Halloween, whilst see mer than either folk. Scott's novel Waverley or the 60 Years Since from 1814 recounts the curious legend of Saint Swithin's share when one of his characters sings a song that is set on Hallowmas Eve and describes a fortune-telling custom centering on a real outcrop of rock. He that dare sit on Saint Swithin's share when the night hag wings the troubled air, questions three when he speaks the spell, he may ask and she must tell. Another traditional Scottish ballad that probably dates from around the time of Tamlane is Alison Gross, which once again involves a young man and a fairy queen, but this time puts them in very different circumstances. At the beginning of the piece, the young man is held captive by the title character, the ugliest witch in the North Country. After she's unsuccessful at buying the young man's affections with variety of enchanted gifts, she turns him into a snake and leaves him to toddle about the tree. However, on Halloween night, the Seelie court or fairies ride by and the queen discovers the young man. She strokes him 3 times and he returns to his proper form. Alison Gross holds the distinction of being the only traditional Halloween tale in which a fairy undoes the work of a witch. Thomas Hardy wrote eloquently about the fascination of bonfires in his novel The Return of the Native, 1878. He described them as druidical rites and Saxon ceremonies, The natives, The druids and the Saxons, What's the drop with druids and Saxons? We already know, right? And said that to light a fire is the instinctive and resistant act of man when at the winter ingress the curfew is sounded throughout nature. Hardy was actually describing Guy Fawkes' Day fires, but bonfires have been just as important to the history of Halloween. In the popular imagination, bonfires have descended in a direct line from the Celts. This excerpt from a magazine article of 1881 gives some notion on how the Celts had been romanticized. Romanticized. The Druids built fires on the hilltops in France, Britain, and Ireland in honor of the sun. At this last festival, the Druids of all regions gathered in their white robes around the stone altar or cairn on the hilltop. Here stood an emblem of the sun, and on the cairn was the sacred fire, which had been kept burning through the year. The Druids formed about the fire, and at a signal quenched it, while deep silence rested on the mountains and valleys. Then the new fire gleamed on the tarn. The people in the valley raised a joyous shout, and from hilltop to hilltop other fires answered the sacred flame. All right, who's the so-called Druids, so-called Chaldeans? And a lot of these Israelites who's become Romanized or Hellenized. Yeah. Bonfires have an interesting history in general, beginning with the word itself. Sorry, I skipped this. So it says, while this is obviously a fanciful scene, it is likely that Halloween bonfire traditions can be traced back at least to the Celtic New Year's ritual of extinguishing all fires and relighting them with an ember from a special fire kindled by the Druids. Bonfires have an interesting history in general, beginning with the word itself, which is probably a derivation of bonfire and dates back to the burning of the bones of Saint John the Baptist by the Roman Emperor Julian in the 4th century AD. In AD 680, the Catholic Church attempted to abolish the practice of bonfires, and in 742, they condemned the practice of using neat fire, friction, to spark kindling. Obviously, they were unsuccessful in their attempts because the making of bonfires at a number of festivals, especially May Eve, Midsummer Eve, and Halloween, continued throughout the centuries. Bonfires at Halloween once served an actual purpose by getting rid of the refuse left over from the harvest. But as previously mentioned, eventually the practice came to involve begging for firewood, mainly on the part of children. In Scotland, the fires were called Samhain and could be seen on every hilltop on Halloween night. One of the most famous descriptions of a Scottish Halloween bonfire comes from the Englishman Thomas Pennant, who kept extensive journals of his travels and recorded this scene in 1772. Hallow Eve is also kept sacred as soon as it is dark. A person sets fire to a bush of broom fastened round a pole, and attended with a crowd runs round the village. He then flings it down, keeps great quantity of combustible matters in it, and makes a great bonfire. A whole tract is thus illuminated at the same time and makes a fine appearance. Occasionally, Halloween bonfires were thought to serve specific purposes. In northern England, bonfires were lit on All Souls' Eve rather than Halloween to light the way for souls out of purgatory. So remember the history of All Saints and All Souls Day, right? We got it on part one about the purgatory and all that. So it says these fires were sometimes called kindles or pinlos, and Halloween was even referred to as Pinley in this district in honor of the bonfires. Another fire custom invoking the realm between heaven and hell was set in Lancashire Field, actually named Purgatory Field. Men assembled there at midnight on Halloween and tossed forkfuls of burning straw into the air while praying for souls in purgatory. In an interview conducted in 1944, an Irish native discussed All Souls' Eve in terms of purgatory. The night of the 1st, 2nd November is known as Uichi Field na Morg, All Souls' Eve. It is believed that the dead whose souls are in purgatory are permitted to return to the ancestral home on that night. In most houses, the doors is left on the latch, unlocked. A good fire is kept burning all night. The members of the household say the family rosary and go early to bed in order to leave the departed souls in undisturbed possession of the fireside. In some areas, fires were lit to protect against witches and malicious fairies. In Scotland, boys might beg for firewood in order to burn the witches, who might also be burned in effigy. Queen Victoria witnessed this practice during her 1869 visit to Balmoral Castle. In Lancashire, witches were thought to assemble on Halloween in the forest of Pendle at a ruined farmhouse called the Malkin Tower. You hear that? Rather than creating bonfires, fearful residents practiced letting the witches. It was believed that if a lighted candle were carried about the fells or hills from 11 to 12 o'clock at night and burned all that time steadily, it had so far triumphed over the evil powers of the witches, who as they passed through the Malkin Tower would employ their utmost efforts to extinguish the light, and the person whom it represented might safely defy their malice during the season. But if by any accident the candle went out, it was an omen of evil to the luckless wight for whom the experiment was made. For the wight. The province of Moray was said to hold a solemnity for the safe and gathering of the produce of the fields of lighting bonfires. The province of Moray. From Perthshire comes this eyewitness account of a spectacular fire tradition. On the evening of the 31st of October, one remarkable ceremony is observed. Heath, broom, and dressings of flags that are tied up upon a pole. This burning pile of sticks, that's what that word means right there, is then kindled. One takes it upon his shoulders and running bears it round the village, a crowded tent. When the fires burning pile of woods is burnt out, the second is bound to the pole and kindled in the same manner as before. Numbers of these blazing pile of woods are often carried about together, and when the night happens to be dark, they form a splendid illumination. This is Halloween and is a night of great festivity. Slash the hijack. The practice of bonfires began to die out in Britain by the end of the 19th century, in part because, as noted earlier, there was simply nothing left to burn, but also because of the dangers posed by bonfires to spectators, and by spectators to other spectators. James Napier, writing in 1879 about a Halloween spent watching boys build bonfires around Loch Tay in Scotland, noted, I was told by an old man, or by old men, that the beginning of this century, men as well as boys took part in getting up the bonfires, and that when the fire was ablaze, all joined hands and danced around the fire and made a great noise, but that at these gatherings generally ended in drunkenness and rough and dangerous fun. The ministers set their faces against the observance and were seconded in their efforts by the more intelligent and well behaved in the community. And so the practice was discontinued by adults and relegated to schoolboys. Says here Robert Burns. While the Halloween bonfire may have been popular, it was soon rivaled and bested by the popularity of Halloween fortune-telling rituals. And certainly no bard captured the spirit of the Scottish Halloween prophecy custom better than Robert Burns, the bard, huh? He was the rhymer, the flow, the rapper. Huh. Burns, who is sometimes referred to as Scotland's favorite son, would nonetheless become most well known for penning the poem Old Lang Syne, which has become something of an anthem for another holiday, New Year's Eve, or the Scottish New Year's celebration, Hogmanay. However, it's Burns' poem Halloween of 1785 that provides a far more revealing look at the traditional festival. In 252 lines, Burns describes some of the legendary background of the holiday. Upon the night when fairies light, the favorite foods, buttered sons, sowings is similar to oatmeal, and especially the games and fortune-telling rituals. So it says here, whom will I marry? Halloween fortune-telling. It's impossible to pinpoint exactly when fortune-telling games became an integral part of Halloween festivities. Most later accounts of them simply refer back to the Burns poem, which suggests that fortune-telling rituals were already well established and linked to Halloween. John Gay's mock pastoral poetic work, The Shepherd's Week of 1714, includes some of the same fortune-telling methods, especially the burning of nuts, but makes no mention of Halloween, although it mentions other festivals such as May Day. Indeed, many of the fortune-telling methods later associated with Halloween have earlier connections to other celebrations, including Midsummer's Eve, St. Agnes' Eve, Christmas, and New Year's. It seems likely that many of these rituals migrated to Scottish Halloween sometime in the 18th century, since the day's history lent itself well to these slightly pagan practices. The vast majority of these fortune-telling games were dedicated to learning the nature of one's future spouse, either by name, character, or profession. Since marriage was probably the most important event in the life of a rural, pre-industrial young person, these rituals, so indelibly described by Burns and carried down all the way to the early 20th century, undoubtedly left a romantic mark on Halloween forever. In the Burns poem, the merry, friendly countryfolk began the evening by venturing into the kale field to pull stalks. This is possibly the most popular of the 18th and 19th century fortune-telling games, and was performed in Ireland with cabbages. With cabbage patch kids, cabbage, huh? Remember in part one how it was talking about how pulling cabbages was that's like part of Halloween. There are numerous variations of this ritual. In some, the fortune seeker must enter the field backwards or blindfolded. but all involved examining the stock to determine the nature of one's future spouse. In the Burns poem, both the shape of the stalk, muckle anise and strut anise, and the taste, sweet or sour, will reveal the beloved's character. The kale stalk might also have been nailed up over the main doorway in the belief that the first young person to enter beneath would be the future spouse or would at least bear the initials of said spouse. This activity was so popular that it was frequently referred to simply as Kalen. All right, Kalen. Next up in the Burns poem is the body custom of young ladies, body, pulling corn. In fact, oats. Excuse me, let me drink some water. Three stalks are pulled, and if the third should lack the grain at the top, the girl will not enter into marriage as a virgin. Listen to what they were doing back then. It all involved Halloween, right? Burns has particular fun with this stanza, suggesting that Nellie loses her tap pickle to Rob while practicing this very custom. The next four stanzas are devoted to burning nuts. Here's how Gay describes the practice in the Thursday section of the Shepherd's Week. 2 hazelnuts I threw into the flame, and to each nut I gave sweetheart's name. The nut that blazed brightest and longest indicated the truest lover. Huh. It's almost like, yeah, a little out there. Yeah, this is a little, yeah. And Halloween, however, some people might call this witchcraft a little bit, even though they oh, I'm just trying to find my husband. All right, let's let the nuts determine it. In Halloween, however, the 2 nuts are named for the lovers, and depending on whether they burn together to ash or jump away from each other, so will the relationship progress. Next, Burns introduces Marin, who retires to the lime kiln, a large brick structure, remember, used for producing quicklime and common fixture on 18th century farms, for a custom involving blue yarn. In the classic version of this fortune-telling stunt, the girl threw her clue or ball into the kiln and would soon feel something tugging on the yarn, at which point she cried out, "Who holds?" She would then hear the name of her future husband, which needless to say was likely uttered by the hidden boy himself. This particular fortune-telling method was especially subject to pranking, as in this example quoted by John Gregerson Campbell, in Witchcraft and Second Sight in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. There is a story of a tailor having hid himself in anticipation of this mode of divination being resorted to, and when the ball was thrown, he caught it and gave the thread a tug. In answer to the question, "Who is this at the end of my little rope?" he said, "I am the devil." Uh-oh. And the woman to whom this frightful answer was given never tried divination again. Oh, man. Oh, man, that was deep right there. Like, she's like, oh, man, she didn't expect that, right? He got her good. Oh, man. Oh, man. It says Burns briefly mentions a method that was popular even into the 20th century, in which a curious young lady would stand before a mirror on Halloween night with an apple. And after either eating it, the apple, right, or slicing it into sections, would see the face of her beloved reflected in the glass. Now, that to me is some crazy witchcraft, demonic stuff right there, man. I'm straight. I ain't trying to look at a mirror and see no image pop up, guys. I don't care how you see this. Oh, that's just natural. That's not pagan. Nah, I'm sorry, man. But I'm straight. I'm straight with that. I'm really, really straight with this one right here. In her collection of Irish legends, Lady Jane Wildey recounts this frightening result from someone who performed this ritual on Halloween night. Uh-oh, like Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Uh-oh. When we were kids, we used to try that, huh? When we were kids, we didn't know any better, man. We didn't know any better. We used to try that, like, Bloody Mary, run out the bathroom or wherever we were. Yeah, we didn't even stay to find out. Not me, at least. I wasn't crazy like that. Yeah, it says here, the lady narrates that on the 1st of November, her servant rushed into the room and fainted on the floor. On recovering, she said that she had played a trick, that night in the name of the devil before the looking glass, but what she had seen she dared not speak of, though the remembrance of it would never leave her brain, and she knew the shock would kill her. They tried to laugh her out of her fears, but the next night she was found quite dead, with her features horribly contorted, lying on the floor before the looking glass, which was shivered to pieces. Wow. Now, now, guys, that sounds just like these horror movies, when people are possessed and then they get all horribly contorted, right? Wow. That sounds just like, if it's true, right? But they're saying that's why we don't mess with stuff like that. Most high over everything. It says here in Halloween, Granny warns little Jenny that "nae doubt but ye may get a sight," and recounts a frightful story from her own youth involving the sowing of hemp seed. In this divination, the fortune seeker went into a hemp field, sowed seed behind him or her, and recited a small rhyme which Burns gives us as "Hemp seed I saw thee, hemp seed I saw thee, and him or her that is to be my true love, come after me and pow thee." Ah, so hemp, right? People growing cannabis, for industrial purposes too, not just recreational. That's they outlawed it because of that part too, not because, anyways. So here's an image. It says of her, I guess, "The Devil Waits Behind the Halloween Mirror." All Halloween's Eve by Emmy Bolanger engraved. All right, so look. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm straight. I ain't trying to see nothing pop out the mirror. I'm good. It says Burns offers an amusing twist to this ritual when the seeker, a bold young man named Jamie Fleck, is startled by the sudden appearance of a pig. Oh man, not even worse. You see a pig? Oh man. Many of these classic Halloween divinations involve belief in the wraith or fetch, which was essentially the spirit of someone not yet dead. Invisible spirits attached to each person. Revs could occasionally separate themselves and become visible to others. Look at this image right here. It says, "All Halloween greetings. Our future and the present we still sow, and over anxious sometimes seek to know events before they happen, and we fall, and thus provide a hearty laugh to all on Halloween." Oh, so funny, huh? So funny. Scottish folklore expert James Napier, when discussing the wraith, mentions the biblical story of Peter knocking on the door of a house while he was in prison, and also the classic Scottish song "Old Robin Gray," in which a woman meeting her old sweetheart exclaims, "I thought it was his wraith." In Ireland, this supernatural double was called a fetch and was believed to foretell good tidings if seen in the morning, but death if glimpsed in the afternoon or evening. All right, you don't want to see that at nighttime. The fetch was usually believed to represent someone suffering from a prolonged illness, but on Halloween it appeared as a prophecy of marriage. In his article Halloween, a threefold chronicle of 1886, William Sharp describes a magical encounter told to him by a resident of Perthshire. At 14, a young lady named Madge Falconer fell in love with her 17-year-old neighbor, Ralph Morgan. Before they were both old enough to wed, however, Ralph moved to India, and Madge didn't see him for nearly 7 years. On the Halloween, just before her 21st birthday, she tried the looking glass prognostication and beheld not Ralph, but an older man with a particular scar. She moved to India shortly thereafter, met again with Ralph, but soon realized she was no longer in love with him. Not long after, she met a man named Major Colville and recognized his as the face she'd seen on Halloween, complete with the scar he had taken during a battle with Sikhs or Sheiks. He and Colville were soon married. One of the most fearsome examples of a custom involving a wraith or wraith is recounted in the Burns work when Meg leads to the barn to win 3 wedges or netting. In this fortune-telling ritual, the seeker went to barn and opened both doors, preferably removing them from their hinges, lest they close on their own and seal the victim in with a menacing spirit. Took down the wedge or the instrument used in winnowing corn, and pantomime the act of separating corn from the chaff 3 times. At the completion of this task, a spectre bearing the appearance of one's future intended would pass through the barn. The fortune seeker must perform all of this after calling on the devil, which no doubt gave Halloween a particularly sinister air. Stacks of barley figured into a fortune-telling method referred to as fondlement, the screw. The fortune seeker went blindfolded 3 times around a stack of barley. Some variants of this tradition specified that it must be done withershins, meaning against the sun, or anti-clockwise. At the end of the last turn would embrace the future beloved. In the Burns poem, young Will attempts this but is unaware that he actually walked 3 times around a stack of timber by mistake. He is startled when he comes face to face with a rotted piece of oak that he mistakes for an aged woman. Many of now obsolete fortune-telling rituals involved water, but perhaps none was as popular as the dipping of the sark's leaf. Burns says this must be performed where 3 lairds' lands meet at a burn, and at that point a young woman would dip her sleeve into the water, then return home to set the shirt to dry by her fire. The lass would then retire to bed, and during the night would see her intended enter the room and turn the shirt to dry by the heat fire. The shirt, so that the other side would dry as well. Of course, Burns once again shows Halloween as a night of playful scares when his lady is startled by a sound, which could be either the devil or a bird, and plunges into the water. A real account of late 18th century sleeve dipping illustrates, however, that Halloween fortune telling wasn't always considered an innocent game. Records from Eastwood relate the confession of a woman who had used charms at Halloween and who said that, at the instigation of an old woman from Ireland, she brought in a pint of water from a well which brides and burials pass over and dip her shirt into, and hung it before the fire, that she either dreamed or else there came something and turned about the chair on which her shirt was, but she could not well see what it was. Her sentence was a rebuke before the congregation. Ha! Yeah, stop doing all these things you don't understand. Another ritual involving water was referred to as the luggy bowls. Luggies are small bowls with handles. Lugs, in this tradition, 3 of them would be filled with different substances and arrayed before a blindfolded fortune seeker, whose future was foretold by whether he touched a dish of clean water, marriage to a virgin, dirty water, marriage to a widow, or nothing, no marriage would occur. The luggy bowls are one of the most common of all Halloween games, and there are dozens of variants, and some of the bowls hold not water but objects. A thimble, for example, symbolizes spinsterhood. The number of bowls might be as high as 6, or the game might be played without using bowls at all. A 19th century version instructed that 3 tin cups partially full of water should be placed on the small ends of 3 funnels, which would be set up in a line on the floor. The young ladies should then take turns at leaping over each of these constructions, with the number of cups knocked over dictating the time until marriage would take place. In the case of an unlucky miss who caught her skirts on all 3 cups, she would remain single. All right, it was doomed for her. If she messed up, oh, she's gonna be single for life. The luggy bowls figure prominently in James Joyce's poignant Halloween story, Clay, published in 1914. Clay describes an urban Irish Halloween party and centers on the tragedy of Maria, an unmarried woman who first touches the dish of clay, an early death, and then the prayer book, a life devoted to God, not a husband. In Burns' poem, a similar twist is played for humor, when Uncle John touches the empty dish 3 times in a row, signifying a life as a single man. He's so infuriated that he hurls the 3 bowls into the fire. Fortune-telling games were also being played in Ireland during the 18th and 19th centuries, but door-to-door begging figured even more prominently. Prognostication involving cabbage and prognostication involving cabbage pulling, nut burning, sowing of hemp, seed, lime kilns, and dipping the sleeve in water are all recorded. But so is begging ritual practice in honor of Saint Columba, a 6th century missionary who converted many Irish and Scottish pagans. So they idolized him then? Huh. Columba, that's probably not even his real name, or Columkill, as he came to be known by the 1700s, was invoked by Irish peasants who went door to door demanding money to buy fatted cows and black sheep for at least in the saint name, for a feast, in the saint's name. Another Irish Halloween custom and ritual was presented by the Straw Boys, a group of young men dressed in distinctive suits made of white straw and tall, conical hats who engaged in wild pranking and petty vandalisms, especially stealing food, directed mainly at families who kept their daughters from the company of boys. The Straw Boys also appeared at weddings, where they would demand a dance with the bride, and this tradition has continued into modern times. Some Irish wedding planners, in fact, offer an appearance by the Straw Boys as an optional paid extra. In Northern Ireland, door-to-door Halloween rhyming occurs for several weeks prior to the actual night of Halloween. Young people may beg at the same houses several times and may receive money which they use to buy fireworks. The fireworks are likewise set off throughout this period, while the 31st of October is reserved for bonfires and family dinners. A similar, though even stranger tradition is recorded in the Shetland Islands off the coast of Scotland. There are a group of young men called the Grulaks, dressed in exotic costumes, ornamented with colored ribbons, tall hats and veils, paid surprise visits to houses on Halloween, demanding food and liquor. Their arrival was announced by firing a shot over the house, and the homeowner had to fire a welcoming round before they would enter. They would file into the kitchen, led by a character called the Scuttler. Scuttler. Halloween greetings in this image right here. So they were led by the Scuttler and bang long sticks on the floor until they were offered food. They also were usually accompanied by a fiddler and would present some sort of performance before leaving. Like the Straw Boys, the Grulaks were also a popular fixture at weddings, and by the 20th century, they were associated almost exclusively with weddings and Christmas. And we continue, right? Chapter 2, it says here, fairies, pukas, and witches. I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. A lot more history of Halloween that most people don't ever know or ever heard of, or these traditions involving Halloween, and some of them leaking into the Americas, right? People don't understand why they're doing them. So we're just going over the history today, just so you could understand, right? Both the Scottish and the Irish had a considerable amount of folklore centered on fairies or seeds, and Halloween appears frequently in this lore. The fact that beliefs in fairies was found primarily among the descendants of the Celts lends credence to the theory that the fairies are the old gods reduced to small supernatural imps by Christianity. Huh. However, in some fairy stories, the fairies also seem to be connected to the spirits of the dead. Lady Wildey, for instance, recorded a traditional Irish story called November Eve, in which a fisherman named Hugh King stays out too late on Halloween and encounters a large band of merrymakers, right? People who getting drunk, who tell him they are bound for a fair. Hugh accompanies them, meets Finvarra, the king of the fairies, and then is pulled into a dance by the spirit of the dead woman. Hugh survives the dreadful night, but in the morning realizes that the fairies mocked and taunted him because he ignored warnings to stay inside on Halloween night. The fairies were thought to live within the grassy hillocks that dotted the landscapes of Ireland and Scotland, and only on Halloween might these fairies raft open to mortals. One Scottish belief had it that a mortal who walked 9 times in an anti-clockwise direction around one of the Cid mounds on Halloween night would be admitted to the fairy realm, where he would experience the pleasures of that world. However, he would be unable to return to his mortal existence and would become forever a sheesh, or man of peace. Fairies might also choose to leave their barrows and visit mortals. A passage from the 15th century historical text called the Book of Fermoy relates the story of Finjan mac Lucha, king of Munster in the 3rd century, who was visited on Samhain night by Bach, a fairy woman, who told him of 50 wonders. Usually the fairies were not so kindly disposed toward humans. In The Golden Bow, 1922, Sir James Fraser relates a Scottish yarn of two young men who, on Halloween night, encountered a brightly lit house full of jigging merrymakers. Jigging, they getting jiggy with it. Get it? Jiggy, jiggy, jiggy. They getting jiggy with it. Merrymakers, people getting drunk. One of the young men immediately entered and joined in the fun, but the other suspected that the house might actually be a fairy knoll. This young man took the precaution of placing a needle in the doorway before entering and thus disarmed the power of the fairies and escaped safely. His companion, however, was trapped in the fairy wrath for a year, and when Halloween came around again, he was found still dancing before he collapsed into a pile of bones. Huh, a pile of bones. In Northern Ireland, families were cautious about allowing children out on Halloween night because of fairies. Well into the early 20th century, people didn't let the kids out. They really believed in this stuff, because it might be real. My mom had the same stories, guys, just to go off track here real quick. My mom said that back in the day, she's from the mountains and the farm here in Costa Rica, in the mountains, the countryside. And back in the day, little kids or people would go missing, and they said it was the elves or the fairies that would take them, that they would, just like it says here, they would lead them into these places, you know. And then she said when technology came about, like radios and television, that's when they went away. That's what she told me, right? That's what she said. She used to find little human footprints right on the ground, where she, up there in the mountains. And they all of a sudden just went away when technology supposedly came out, right? Supposedly, right? So that's just a story, and I shared this story with somebody else, I think I knew, or somebody, and he told me the same thing. They had the same story about technology making them go away. Yeah. So, oh, I'm glad you like part one, guys. Make sure to watch part one, which I did 4 days ago, and we just add into that, some more history, some more things done Halloween. So, again, Halloween night, people in Ireland a lot of time didn't let their kids go out, right? Because of the fairies might take them, just like my mom used to say. These stories, they're all the same. They're all the same. You see, like, because this has to be some truth to them. There has to be something there, a whole other world we don't understand, right? That the Most High has. That's why if there's good, there's evil, right? If there's, it's polarities, and that's why you gotta keep the code and Most High over everything. You might get stuck or might be taken by a fairy. It says if a child set foot on Benweed on Halloween night, he or she was certain to be carried off by the little people. The little people, like I said, my mom said the duendes, the elves, the little people. For protection, parents might rub a mixture of dry oatmeal and salt into the hair of any child venturing out on Halloween night. Babies were also at risk, since fairies might steal the infant and replace it with a stock or fairy child. Wow. The stock sometimes had the appearance of a tiny old bearded man who never aged, or the baby might appear normal, but would soon sicken and die. A baby could be protected on Halloween night by placing something made of iron in or over its crib. All right. So, PhD Goldie says, I grew up in Ireland. Trust me, I know. I get you. I get you. I know you know. Says a fairy child might be detected by boiling eggshells in its presence. This would cause the tot to utter an adult exclamation and thus give way its true nature. Yep. Shout out to everybody from Ireland and Scotland here, and all the people, my followers there, all the people at the support. Thank you. The mischievous good people. This euphemism was spoken in order to not risk offending the fairies. We're also fond of carrying off attractive adult humans who could usually only be rescued on Halloween. The Ballad of Tamlane is the classic example of this, but Sir Walter Scott also records in his introduction to Tamlane tale of Lothian farmer whose wife was stolen by fairies and who appeared to him repeatedly for a year after her kidnapping, telling him how to rescue her come Halloween night. However, when the fateful evening arrived, the farmer was so frightened by the wild, unearthly sound of the fairy troop that he was paralyzed and could only stand helplessly listening to the mournful cries of his wife as she passed him by one last time before being lost forever. Brave humans might use the Halloween power of fairies for their own ends. In the Irish legend of Gulish na Gusto, an abused young man named Gulish joins the fairies on Halloween night on a magical ride to France, where the fairies beg Gulish's help in kidnapping a beautiful princess before her wedding. Gulish agrees but first demands to be taken to Rome, where the fairies assist him in forcing the Pope to reinstate Gulish's parish priest. In France, Gulish and the fairies successfully make off with the girl and return to Ireland, but Gulish decides to keep the princess for himself. The fairies curse the princess, removing her power of speech, but on the following Halloween, Gulish overhears some of the fairies describing a cure for the prince's affliction and is thus able to banish the curse. He and the princess are then married. All right, so let's look at this image. Halloween greetings. Look, just like a Christmas card, right? Like back in the day, it was so innocent. Sometimes they were like, like a Christmas card. Hey, Halloween greetings. And you see all the fairies. Look at it coming out. Look at that. Fairies emerged from their barrow on Halloween night in this postcard from 1912. Says one of the most curious Scottish Halloween creatures was found on Lewis, an island in the Outer Hebrides. On Halloween night, families assembled at the church of St. Mulway, where each provided a bag of malt that was brewed into ale. One man was then chosen to wade into the sea with a cup of this ale, at which point he recited, "Shoni, I give you this cup of ale, hoping that you'll be so kind as to send us plenty of seaweed, or for enriching our ground the ensuing year." After hurling the ale into the sea, the man waded back to shore. An entire assemblage returned to the church, where they spent a few solemn moments in contemplation of a candle. When the candle was extinguished, the remainder of the night was devoted to drinking the ale and dancing in the fields, merrymaking, getting drunk. The origin of the name Shoni has been lost in history, although it may be derived from Seanad, the Scottish Gaelic version of Johnny, suggesting that this ritual is actually honoring one of the Christian saints named John. Shawnee, Johnny, Sean, John, Some of the grimmest of Halloween beliefs were found among the Welsh, and the Welsh continued to observe the day for longer than their English neighbors. A book of 1849 notes the Welsh fondness for festivals and offers some insight into why Halloween was more beloved by members of the working class. Old festival days, with their games and merriment, superstitions and legends which have gone or are fast gone into forgetfulness in England, are still important and still observed in Wales. All Hallows Eve, so famous in Scottish and Irish story, is here no less celebrated, and its customs no less kept. It is the people of the locality and the soil who are not worn into the smoothness of general society by intercourse with large towns, that devote themselves to these observances, and thus the laborers and the old women of the village are they particularly who expect and keep Hollentide. Halloween's name in Wales was no Calan Gaef, which meant night of the winter Calends. Although the Welsh also considered Halloween the most unearthly of Teirnos Isbridion, or Three Spirit Nights, the other two were May Eve and Midsummer's Eve. On those 3 nights, the spirits of those who had drowned might surface once again, riding white horses atop the waves. A typical 19th century Welsh Halloween party might include such ordinary diversions as bobbing for apples, snap apple, and fortune-telling games such as burning nuts on the hearth. But the way the nuts blazed determined whether those who had tossed them into the flames would still be alive next Halloween. Uh-oh, I'm straight, I ain't playing that. Not whom they were likely to marry. Huh. The Welsh were believers in the custom of the church porch, in which those who were brave enough to stand by the church windows at midnight on Halloween might hear a sermon delivered by Satan. Whoa. In which he would reveal the names of all those from the parish who would die during the coming year. Wow. Of course, the listener ran the risk of hearing his own or her own name spoken. In another version of this belief, the curious were instructed to hide in the churchyard on Halloween night. At midnight, they would witness a procession of all those in the parish who would die in the coming year. Although any member of the procession who abruptly turned back indicated someone who would suffer a serious illness but recover. Welsh women also gathered in churches on Halloween, believing they could read fates there from flickering candle flames. All this is witchcraft thought, guys. This is hijacked hermetic thinking. The Welsh called fairies Twelfth Teg or Twilweth Teg. It had many stories about supernatural occurrences on Halloween. One begins with a hiring fair on Halloween when a kingly order couple hire a lovely young servant girl to work for them. The girl disappears after a time, and a year later the wife is called one night to serve as midwife. She is taken on a fairy hillock, where she sees the most beautiful room she has ever visited. However, upon accidentally rubbing a fairy potion into one eye, she realizes the new mother is her former servant girl, and the room is actually little more than a cave. The servant girl's fairy husband puts the wife's anointed eye out with a stick. Welsh belief in witches and other superstitions also ran strong. They believed that as long as consecrated bells rang, they were protected from witches on Halloween. Okay? So you understand that whole bell in churches, when they ring the bell in the Catholic churches and all that? You understand? They doing that for a reason. Was food left out for the dead on Halloween. Wind blowing over the feet of corpses on Halloween would create a singing sound that predicted death to any who heard it. One could also listen to the wind in a crossroads on Halloween night to receive omens of the coming year. Hearing crows around a house on Halloween meant that someone in the house would soon die, and that uneasy feeling filled anyone who went to the ancient ruins known as Druidical Stones and whispered a wish to them would find that wish coming true during the following year. Yeah, this is some heavy stuff here. The Welsh word waka, goblin, led to the word puka or puka, a malicious fairy or demonic creature that appeared in folklore from all over British Isles. The puka was a shapeshifter who was seen on Halloween night in the form of a horse. All right, you guys hear that? If it was a water horse that arose from a loch or other body of water, it would make a splendid steed if captured, but could also rip apart those who approached it. In Scotland, they told the story of the Uisk or water horse that lived in Loch Dorsh. One Halloween, a foolish young girl decided to try the Halloween fortune-telling custom of dipping her sleeve in water, and vanished forever, leaving behind only her screams in the night and shreds of clothing found next morning near a hoof print. The name Puka also led to Puck, who of course featured as the lead mischievous sprite in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. All right, you guys hear the backdrop of that story as well? Midsummer Eve, Midsummer Night, and the symbology in it. The Welsh had their own Halloween bonfire ritual as well, called Col Queth, the literal translation of which means an omen of danger. The bonfire was built on Halloween by a family on a prominence near their house. Each family member made a mark on a white stone, which was then thrown into the fire on the following morning. Any stone that couldn't be found foretold the death of its owner within the year. Young people also cast nuts into the bonfire, and when the nuts burst or shot out, they fled in terror of the goblin black-tailed soul, the Hawadu Guata, who was thought to be abroad on Halloween. The Welsh weren't all about death and goblins, however. They also believed in the Halloween fetch, who might reveal the identity of a future spouse. In one tradition, young women assembled before midnight around a dining table and turned all the silverware upside down at midnight. They might see their intended enter to turn everything to rights again. I'm straight with that, One Welsh woman who recounted this custom added an interesting twist to the lore of the fetch. She did indeed claim to have witnessed the apparition of a man entering to turn the silverware, but none of the other three women with her saw a thing. A short time later, she met the man in person for the first time, and they were soon married. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Hey, this ain't Goosebumps, though. This is real history. That's where the Goosebumps got this from. Okay, you get it? You're seeing it in reverse. So this is the real history. The people really did all this stuff. It's not just entertainment. So we continue, right? Since we're here, I hope you guys ain't in a hurry. Or you got somewhere to go trick-or-treating or something. All right, here we go. It says, foods, fairs, and other British traditions. It says Halloween had a number of its own food traditions, many of which have continued to the present day. Certainly, no food is more identified with Halloween in all of its various times and locations than the apple. The association of the apple and Halloween likely dates back to the Celts. Although we have no specific connections drawn between Samhain and apples, apples certainly abound in every other part of Celtic mythology. The mythic trees of the divine island, Elysium, grew three fruits, all right? That's the Americas. That right there, the Elysium, this mythical island, divine island with the gods, yeah, that was the Americas. Yeah, we grew three. We got the apples, right? Garden of Eden, the Granada, the pomegranate, the mythic trees of the divine island, Elysium, grew tree fruits, apples, acorns, and nuts. In the tragic story of star-crossed lovers, Eileen and Bailey, an apple tree, grew from Aileen's grave, and the apples bore the face of her beloved Bailey. The chief god and father of hero Angus Og, the dog that lived in kingdom where there were always apple trees and fruit. Where is there always apple trees and fruit? That happens here in Costa Rica too, to say nothing of a never-ending supply of ale. All right, so then you got a never-ending supply of ale if you got apples and all that, right? In the epic voyages of Maeldun, the eponymous hero feeds his starving crew at one point when he encounters an island with a magical apple tree whose fruits supply the sailors for 40 days and nights. There has even been some speculation that the Celts brought apple growing with them when they first came to the British Isles. The Celts brought apples. Where's the apples originally from? Something to look into, right? Like, who's the ancient Celts? Where are they from? What's a Celt? Celt is just a tool, a type of tool they use. That's not the name they gave themselves. You guys know that, right? Anyways, given that apples ripen in October and that Samhain was held at the end of that month, it seems likely that apples would have been plentiful at a Celtic Samhain feast. Later Halloween celebrations weren't content to use the apple only as a menu item, but also employed it in games, fortune-telling, and decoration. In some areas of Ireland, the 1st of November was once called La Mas Ubal, the Day of the Apple. And in parts of the British Isles, Halloween is still celebrated with a drink made of apples and ale called lamb's wool, a corruption of the name. One particular piquant description of producing lamb's wool states that on Halloween, the apple was roasted on a string until it dropped off into a bowl of spiced ale set beneath it. A journal article on Halloween written in 1844 notes that the custom of bobbing for apples on All Hallow Eve, or Ian, All Hallow and on All Saints' Day, which was formerly common over all England, is still practiced in some parts of Ireland. This suggests that bobbing or ducking for apples had fallen out of favor in most areas of England by then. Robert Burns makes no mention of the custom in his classic work, but a poem of 1792 by a contemporary, Janet Little, mentions snap-apple, a risky game in which an apple was placed on one end of a suspended stick and a lit candle at the other. The stick was then spun, and the object was to retrieve a mouthful of apple instead of hot wax. Wow. This game was so popular that Halloween became known as Snap Apple Night. In some areas, or in Wales, Snatching Night, from the act of snatching the apple. You guys hear that? A different way of playing the apple game, right? Likewise, the name Nutcrack Night, derived from burning nuts on the hearth to tell fortunes, was sometimes used in northern England. Huh. So bobbing for apples had been a popular pastime in Britain for at least 400 years, with the 14th century illuminated manuscript, the Luttrell Psalter, showing a Lord servant engaged in the game, but by the 19th century it may have been confined to Ireland and just a few areas of England. In his observations on popular antiquities, 1810, John Brand's entry on Halloween begins with apples, although he suggests that bobbing is limited to only the north of England. No, the Cymri are not, no, different people. Cimmerians are Cymri, and many Cimmerians mixed with ancient Welsh people, and that's why they got stuck with the Cymri name. And that's missing a lot of context. But let's stay on topic though, thank you. Let's stay on topic. Sorry guys. So this is what he said. It says, it is customary on this night for young people in the north to dive for apples, catch at them when stuck onto one end of a kind of a hanging beam, at the other extremity of which is fixed a lighted candle, and that with their mouths only, having their hands tied behind their backs, and many other fooleries, and many other foolish games, he says. In 1833, London painter Daniel Maclise created a small stir in the art world with his painting Snap Apple Night, which had been inspired by a trip to Ireland in 1832 and a visit to a Halloween party held by an esteemed local priest, Father Matthew Horgan. In the painting, party guests are shown both playing Snap Apple and bobbing for apples. Bobbing for apples might function as both a party game and a fortune-telling ritual. The game offered alternatives such as spearing an apple with a fork dropped from above and retrieving an apple with a small extra prize such as a coin inserted into it. The element of augury, however, could be added simply by carving initials into the apples and seeing whose apple each player could successfully retrieve, or by placing a bit of a retrieved apple under the pillow that night to invite prophetic dreams. Man, I don't know, guys. It's all to me is like spells and you know all that. Yeah. But anyways, look at this image. I see the owl, the pumpkins, the witch. Oh man, this is from Bobbing for Apples. It doesn't say. Okay, it says Burns may not have rhymed about bobbing for apples, but he did mention the fortune-telling ritual of eating an apple before a mirror at midnight on Halloween. Huh. Which went on to be one of the most oft-reported often reported popular of the Halloween fortune-telling stunts. There were dozens of variants in this ritual. In some, the lass was required to brush her hair as she ate the apple, while in others it was necessary to slice the apple into 9 sections, with the future intended appearance to receive the final slice. Parts of apples were used in a number of fortune-telling customs. The skin of the apple might be pared and then flung over the left shoulder as this rhyme, adapted from Gay's The Shepherd's Week, was recited. I pared this pippin round and round again, my sweetheart's name to flourish on the plain. I fling the unbroken pattern over my head, my sweetheart's letter on the ground is read. The perverted arts, there you go. The apple parent was then examined to find the shape of an initial, which would indicate the name of one's future spouse. Apple seeds were also put to use. The apple was cut open, and the number of visible seeds indicated the future. 2 meant early marriage, 3 augured wealth, and so on. Seeds might be used on a hearth in place of nuts, or might be named and stuck to the skin of the face or hands. The first to fall might indicate the failed suitor, or the number of seeds remaining after a clap might indicate the number of years until marriage. An article of 1822 recounting an Englishman's visit to an Irish Halloween party notes that 2 young women entertained themselves by naming a pair of apples after a local lord and lady, then roasting them on the fire to laugh at the way they furiously sputtered and foamed. Nuts were also revered by the Celts and have been another staple of late harvest Halloween celebrations ever since. The custom of burning nuts on Halloween night to find the identity of one's future spouse or the temperament of the relationship was practiced equally in Ireland, Scotland, and northern parts of England and America, at least until ovens replaced open hearths. Chestnuts, walnuts, and hazelnuts were those most often used, and one custom involved combining a walnut, a hazelnut, and a nutmeg with some butter and sugar into small pills, which were then taken just before bedtime on Halloween night to bring prophetic dreams. Walnut shells were used in a number of fortune-telling rituals. Small objects might be placed inside shells that were then tied together, and the couple that could match 2 objects were destined for marriage. Or small boats might be created from shells that were then filled with lighted candles and placed into a tub. Their subsequent movements to and away from other boats indicating future relationships. Nuts also provided Halloween games. They could be hidden around a room to create a treasure hunt. Small prizes were also sometimes hidden in sealed walnut shells. Cabbage or kale, or in Wales especially leeks, was another popular Halloween food, used in fortune telling, pranking, and a number of Halloween specific dishes. The most common fortune telling custom was that described by Burns, in which young people pulled cabbages on Halloween, then examined and tasted the stalk to glean insight into future mates. Wow. Oh man, a lot of hijack here involved too. Mischievous boys found an almost endless number of uses for cabbage and Halloween pranking. Cabbages made convenient missiles. It might be pulled and thrown at the doors of a prankster's enemy. In one Scottish practice called burning the Ricky Mur, the stalk of the cabbage was hollowed out and filled instead with tow, which produced long flames when lit and blown, preferably through keyholes. Wow. There were even stories of pranksters tying strings to cabbages in a field to give passersby the illusion that the cabbages were moving. Wow. So check it out. So guys, on part 1 of this 4 days ago when we did part 1, right? When we read chapter 3, we read a lot of chapter 3 was talking about the history of pranks in the States and in Europe and in the States, how it got so bad in the States in Halloween night that they had to start doing something about it, right? They had to try to make it a more positive holiday and more a family-friendly oriented thing. So we're going to read about that today. So That's why I just wanted to remind you that we read a whole like chapter about the pranks and how it was going out of hand. It was going out of hand, you know. Hey, you know, on Halloween night, I used to do the, you know, little pranks here and there. Sometimes my boy with the eggs and all that, and you know, we used to do that stuff as kids. So cabbage is one of the three main ingredients in colcannon, a food so popular at Halloween that 31st of October was known as colcannon night. In some areas of Ireland and Scotland, colcannon consists of cabbage, potatoes, and onions mashed together, and is sometimes served with a ring or other tokens of prediction hidden inside. Grains were also harvested around Halloween, and Burns noted the popularity of oats and barley in Halloween fortune-telling customs. The grain harvest was often celebrated by using parts of the corn to create a small doll-like figure called the corn dolly or heilige. This figure was hung in the kitchen and left there until Christmas, and was sometimes named differently, as a young maid or an old woman, depending on whether it was cut before or after Halloween. Halloween had a variety of special cakes and baked goods, most of which also served in fortune-telling customs. The fortune cake could be any cake with a small token that represented future endeavors baked inside. Receiving a slice of cake with a coin in it, for example, foretold wealth, while a ring represented marriage, and a thimble spinsterhood. The dumb cake was made from a simple dough that a group of girls prepared together in silence. At the end of baking, the girls' future husbands would supposedly appear to take a piece. In Ireland, a special bread known as barmbrack remains a Halloween tradition made from strong black tea and various dried nut fruits. Barmbrack is usually baked with fortune-telling pieces inside. In Ireland, boxty has long been a familiar Halloween food item. A pancake made from potatoes and flour, boxty, from the Irish boxty, meaning poorhouse bread, was popular on both Halloween and Boxing Day menus. Another popular Irish Halloween food based on potatoes was champ, in which potatoes were mashed with milk, butter, and spring onions with fortune-telling tokens usually hidden inside. Stampy was a sweet potato cake served on Halloween, made with potatoes, sugar, cream, and caraway seeds. But perhaps no food item was as important as the soul cake. Souling or soul caking. Huh, soul cooking, huh? Soul cake, huh? Souling, huh? Soul spirit cooking, huh? Huh, souling or soul caking once took place throughout the British Isles, and since it was reported in 1511 edition of Festival, it is one of the earliest reported Halloween activities. Distribution of soul cakes was reported as late as the beginning of the 20th century in some areas, especially Derbyshire, Lancashire, Shropshire, and Cheshire, and typically took place late on the 1st of November, All Souls' Eve. Souling mostly involved children, although sometimes adults took part as well. One description from 1880 includes a version of a traditional souling rhyme. The children go round to the houses early and late on All Saints' Day, not All Souls' Day, and sing monotonously a doggerel. The lines vary a little with the groups of children, 3 to 6 in a group. The most complete version I can give you is as follows. Soul, soul, a soul cake. Good mistress, give soul cake. One for Peter, one for Paul, and one for them as made us all. An apple or a cherry, or anything else to make us merry. Oh, good mistress, to the cellar, and fetch us a pail of water. It is a good fame to get a good name. Put that in a rap beat, you know? In some areas, children engage in souling in the morning, while servants or farm workers went from house to house in the evening, begging food and beer. And beer. Gotta make it fun, you know? The adults sometimes accompanied themselves with small musical instruments, such as a concertina, And in both cases, the groups may have blackened their faces and or carried with them a hobby horse. The hobby horse, sometimes referred to as Dobby horse or Old Hob, was frequently a macabre creation consisting of a real horse's skull, mounted atop a staff and carried by a man draped in a sheet or skin. Hobby horses were usually part of Christmas mumming plays, in which a troupe of adult actors went from house to house on Christmas Eve or day and presented a variant of old play, St. George and the Turk, but they also made an appearance at Halloween. The ritual of Solon included, of course, both those who were begging and the homeowners who handed out food, drink, and coins. However, the most important item was the soul cake, known in some areas as samas cakes or samas loaves. These were small round seed cakes made with spices and with currants on top, and were themselves considered good luck. They were often kept instead of eaten. Certain homeowners had soul cakes that they had kept for years. Listen to this, wow. One woman in Whitby was said in 1817 to have a soul cake that was a century old. Wow. She's talking about, yo, my cake is 100 years old. It's all moldy and stinky, but I love my soul cake. Wow. The Isle of Man had its own particular and peculiar customs. The Manx name for Halloween was Hollantide or Huptuna, pronounced Huptune. Wow, that's totally different than why it's spelled, huh? Which may have been derived from the Scottish name for New Year's, Hogmanay. On the 31st of October, Manx youngsters have traditionally carried carved and lit turnips, known as moots, and gone from house to house reciting, or since the 19th century singing, some variant of this odd poem. Huptuna, this is old Hollantide night. Trollala, the moon shines fair and bright. Huptuna, I went to the well. Trollala, and drank my fill. Huptuna, on the way coming back. Trollala, I met a polecat. Huptuna, the cat began to grin. Trollala, and I began to run. Huptuna, where did you run to? Trollala, I ran to Scotland. Huptuna, what were they doing there? Trollala, baking bannocks and roasting collops. Huptuna, if you are going to give us anything, give us it soon, or we'll away by the light of the moon. Huptuna. Money was exchanged for the performance, and the money was used to buy fireworks for Guy Fawkes' Eve. Huptuna is still popular on the Isle of Man, although pumpkins are now as common as turnips, and Halloween material has been sold in shops for about the last decade. And one recent survey, 57% of Manx residents reported that Huptuna was still fairly active in several areas, although teenage respondents were more likely to use the name Halloween. There were a few slightly more practical uses for Halloween as well. Folklore included many mentions of weather in reference to All Saints' Day because of its importance as a harvest festival and its place in the calendar as the transition from autumn to winter. One belief was that the wind's direction on Halloween would hold throughout winter. A more whimsical rhyme ran, "If ducks do slide at Hollantide at Christmas they will swim. If ducks do swim at Hollantide at Christmas they will slide." The period between Halloween and Martinmas was often a short spell of warmer weather and was referred to by Shakespeare in Henry IV's Part 1 as All Hallown Summer. Farmers were commanded to sow wheat from Michaelmas to Hollantide, and one recorded saying ran, "Set trees at Alan Hollantide and command them to prosper. Set them after Candlemas and entreat them to grow." Just as the Celts had repaid debts on Samhain, so Halloween also had an economic side. It was popular time for hiring fairs, when servants who had just finished another year's harvest with a lord would assemble to find next season's work. If these fairs were held on the 2nd of November, All Souls' Day, they were sometimes referred to as soul mass hirings. Hiring fairs often included celebrations as well, since those hired were usually given a small advance payment. Hiring fairs also occurred on Guy Fawkes Day and Martinmas. Edinburgh was famed for its annual Hallow Fair, which lasted for more than a week, and is recorded in the Edinburgh Charter of 1507. Hallow Fair, which was still being held into the 21st century, was less about business, although much was conducted there, than it was about providing a final opportunity for fun before the onset of the cruel Scottish winter. The poet Robert Ferguson, sometimes thought of as the poet who paved the way for Burns, captured the atmosphere in his Hallow Fair of 1772. At Hallowmas, one nights grow long, and starny shine fu clear. One folk the nipping call to bang, their winter habrams wear. Near Edinburgh a fair their hats, I what their name ways name is, for strapping dames and sturdy lads, and captains true more famous than it that day. At Ferguson's Hallow Fair, young people drink and flirt, defy authority, and buy goods from hawkers who have traveled long distances. Tide fairs were also held in Wales, and were boisterous affairs with booths, crowded streets, and pickpockets on the prowl. They involved both shopping. Here, as in Scotland, gingerbread was a popular item, and hiring for the following year. Charity was also a common fixture of the Halloween season. In Shropshire, for instance, All Saints' Day was celebrated with a tradition called either Pierce's Charity or the Parting of the White Bread. A gentleman named Pierce had specified in his will that a small amount should be set aside each year to prepare bread for local widows and widowers, and this custom continued until nearly the end of the 19th century. One of the most curious Halloween business rituals was the horseshoe and hobnail service, which took place in the law courts in London each 31st of October until the turn of the 20th century. Dating back roughly 700 years, this ritual involved payment of rent by the king's remembrancer, acting on behalf of the tenants of 2 parcels of land held in Shropshire to the Corporation of London, and consisted of 2 parts. First, the city solicitor, acting on behalf of the corporation, cut through 2 bundles of wood using a hatchet on one and bill hook on the other. Second, he counted out 6 horseshoes and 61 hobnails, the original rent due on the lands. This odd practice probably dated back to the use of the rented lands by the Knights Templar. Huh. Wow. It was also around the end of the 19th century that the Catholic Church stopped naming churches All Hallows out of deference to the growing popularity of Halloween. An account written in 1894 of a London parish named All Hallows Staining explains, the dedication All Hallows was in pre-Reformation times a favorite one for churches. Listen to that, right? In the later years, the dedication of similar meaning, example, All Saints, has been preferred, and the terms All Hallows is now usually restricted to All Hallows Eve, 31st of October. I mean, you saw what I said, Nitzia. You can read what I'm saying. There's no spells here. By the late 19th century, the celebrations of Halloween in Great Britain seems to have been confined almost solely to children or poorer adults. Virtually all of the descriptions of adult celebrations from this time describe the participants as servants, peasants, or beggars. Throughout much of the 20th century, Halloween was little more than a curiosity in most of Britain. But over the last 2 decades, American-style Halloween has exploded in popularity throughout the UK. British retailers reported that UK Halloween spending went from 12 million in 2001 to 280 million in 2010. All right, it's big business. It's big business. That's why they push it on us too. with consumers purchasing pumpkins, decorations, and costumes. Among the reasons given for the skyrocketing sales figures are the popularity of such US films, because of the US, right, and series as True Blood and Twilight, and a desire to escape from a dismal economy into the realm of the fantastic. While many modern Britons still celebrate Halloween with simple fireworks and parties, costumes are becoming more popular. The supermarket chain Tesco didn't even stock adult Halloween costumes until 2009, when the day fell on Saturday, tipping off retailers to expect more sales. However, the bakery chain Greg's doubled sales of items such as bad biscuits and creepy cupcakes from 2008 to 2009. Another supermarket chain, Waitrose, reported 676% increase in sales of large pumpkins from 2009 to 2010. In 2009, retail sales for Halloween finally overtook those for Valentine's Day in the UK and now lag behind only Easter and Christmas. All right, so again, so this book is written 2012, so it might be even different now, right? Wait, where were we? Come on, where were we? Uh, how did a festival that was essentially born in the British Isles find new life there after more than a century of languishing as little more than a quaint memory? To answer that, it's necessary to leap across the Atlantic and examine how Halloween first took root in America during the 19th century and why it came to flourish there. All right. And that's when it goes into chapter 3. But I want to tell you guys that we actually read a large amount of chapter 3. I know I did it because I wouldn't know if I was going to do another Halloween video, right? So I wanted to talk about some of the most, main things about it. So I read a couple of things and I read a couple chapters on part 1. Make sure you guys get that, all right? Because we did read a lot of chapter 3 of the history, how, coming over here, the traditions and stuff. So we're going to continue in chapter 3 in another part because it went in deep, you know, about the pranks and all that. The pranks just being never frightened, or it goes deep into how it became like it got bad with the pranks, right? And pumpkins and the tradition of pumpkin carvings and all that we went over. That's why I say make sure to catch up. Hold up. Make sure to catch up. Let's see. See, not everyone saw Halloween and mischief as simply the fun-loving but ultimately harmless sport of young boys. As pranking became more widespread, it became more of a problem. So it had gotten really bad, guys. The pranking. So this is where we left off on part 1, and we're gonna pick up from here, right? So make sure to catch part 1 again from 4 days ago. Halloween origins, Samhain. Make sure to watch that, all right? If you missed it, we went over a lot of good info on that one. It says, fortunately, so this is regarding the pranking and how they had to shed a more positive light on Halloween, and especially if they want to sell it, right, to family-oriented people, right? They want to make it a holiday. They gotta, make it more positive. So it says, fortunately, more practical alternatives proved to be effective. Towns and civic groups such as the YMCA and the Boy Scouts began to offer boys other ways to celebrate Halloween, including parties, parades, costuming, carnivals, and contests. Schools took an active role in entertaining children at Halloween, and soon there was an entire cottage industry based around writing holiday booklets aimed specifically at children and teachers. These books were popular from about 1915 until 1950, when trick-or-treat took over, in other words, and included poetry recitations, one-act plays, pageant suggestions, and other theatrical performances that would presumably occupy young minds for the week leading up to Halloween, and would thus keep them from contemplating pranking. Some of these pieces, in fact, specifically address the problem of pranking, albeit in a charming manner that theoretically would appeal to children. Take, for example, the short play Making Jack-o'-lanterns from the Best Halloween Book, 1931, which includes this dialogue between two boys as they work on their pumpkins. Harold, I think I'll go over the tracks and scare the widow Mitchell little. We did that last year and had a lot of fun. Bill, I wasn't so much fun when she told the principal about it, and we all lost our recesses. Let's think of something different. Harold, I like to do something with mine that would bring pleasure to someone instead of injury. There must be some good that can be done with jack-o'-lanterns. So after Harold's abrupt change of heart, the boys decide to present their jack-o'-lanterns to a poor family that cannot afford their own. Chambers of commerce and other merchant associations also took an active part in distracting would-be Halloween pranksters. So look, they're trying to make it a more positive thing because before these times, right, before that, like early 1900s, it was bad, guys. It was like people were doing really crazy stuff on Halloween. We read about it, right? There's an article of 1939 that appeared in an official publication of the Rotary Club, touted decreased pranking, due in part, of course, to activities sponsored by Rotary clubs across the USA, and described how store owners had succeeded with everything from paying for parties to bringing rowdy boys to a boxing ring on Halloween night. Rotarians in Calexico, California, described their Halloween mirthquake. First, a noise parade of costume school children led by their teachers. Next, an interval of field contests, tugs of war, a sandbag race, a fifth grade football classic, a grease pig catching contest, then free tickets to a theater. They were trying to calm down the bad kids, right? Window decorating contests, costume contests, and even renting trains to carry rural pranksters to toll were all cheaper than repairing mass vandalism, and youngsters seemed eager to participate as well. One town took the pranking problem so seriously that it ended up becoming the town's identity. Anoka, Minnesota claims to have been the first city in the United States to put on a Halloween celebration to divert its youngsters from Halloween pranks. Tired of waking up on the 1st of November to find their cattle roaming on Main Street in 1920, Anoka's civic leaders instituted a program of Halloween parades, giveaways, and bonfires. In 1937, 12-year-old Harold Blair arrived in Washington, D.C. with a proclamation naming Anoka the Halloween capital of the world. The insignia on Harold's sweater is now embedded in one of Anoka's downtown sidewalks, and the town has continued to hold both the title and the celebrations. A combination of parades and contests spans the week preceding Halloween and boasts 40,000 participants. So we went over the bobbing for apples and the history, right? Like, so while teachers kept troublemakers occupied in school and merchants made towns safe again, parents created diversions at home for their mischievous offspring. Thanks to the Depression, however, money in the late 1920s and early 30s was scarce, and parties weren't cheap. One solution was for neighbors to pool resources and create the house-to-house party in which groups of children were led from one house to the next, each home hosting a different themed activity. This would soon evolve into another tradition, perhaps the most cherished of all American Halloween rituals, all right? So all that history in chapter 3 really to talk about why trick-or-treat started, because remember now, they weren't doing trick-or-treating. They were out there doing pranks, they were doing mischievous stuff on Halloween night. Trick-or-treating didn't exist. So this is one of the reasons why trick-or-treat came about, to put the kids to have them do something more positive and just at least not prank, not doing mischievous stuff, right? That's what they're saying here, right? But is it a trick or is it a treat? While it's tempting to draw connections between the New World's institutionalized begging ritual and earlier Old World traditions, such as the mass house-to-house performance of the Grulags or the Straw Boys, Guy Fawkes begging or souling trick-or-treat probably sprang out of more recent antecedents, right? So we read about that earlier, right? All these things, how people were begging, going around begging for wood to do bonfires. Why not? Why wouldn't it be connected? That literally, it does definitely seem like it's connected. The begging, right? Begging for trick-or-treat, you're begging for candy. It's the same, you're begging for something. That definitely has something to do with that, right? But they're saying here, but maybe it's more of a modern thing. It says, in New York City, Thanksgiving, now celebrated in the USA with a traditional turkey dinner on the fourth Thursday of November, was compared in the 1870s with Guy Fawkes Day. It had become a rowdy festival of thousands of boys organizing crews, similar to the Guy Fawkes crews who still parade and lose each year. who were rewarded with gifts of money. Costumed children were also recorded going from house to house and begging food. Even more similar to trick or treating was Christmas custom called Belsnickeln, derived from a German mumming tradition known as Pelznickel. Belsnickeling was performed in the eastern areas of the USA and Canada and consisted of groups of costume participants moving from house to house, offering small tricks in exchange for treats of food and drink. All right, you guys hear that? In Nova Scotia, the Belsnickeling performers deliberately frightened young children who might be asked if they had been good before being rewarded with a treat. In one version of the Belsnickeling, those whose houses were visited by the custom revealers were required to guess the identities of the disguised guest and had to hand over a treat to anyone they couldn't identify. This same custom appears in some early descriptions of trick or treat, leading credence to the possibility that it derived from its Christmas cousin. In fact, the earliest recorded usage of the actual phrase trick or treat in connection with Halloween comes from Alberta, Canada, where in 1927 a newspaper article reported on pranksters demanding trick or treat. You either give me a treat or I'm gonna give you a trick. Get it? I'm gonna vandalize your house. Now that makes sense right there. That makes sense right there. At houses, although no mention of costume is made. By the 1930s, the phrase in connection with Halloween and costumed children seemed to be working its way down through the northern USA, as states like Oregon reported that young goblins and ghosts employing modern shakedown methods successfully worked the trick or treat system. Ah, it's like ransoming, right? Racketeering. It's like racketeering. Blackmailing. One of the first national mentions of trick or treat appears in an article of 1939 entitled A Victim of Window Soaping Brigade, which both refers to trick or treat as the age-old Halloween salutations and makes it plain that the practice was a method of subverting rowdy pranking. Still, it wasn't until after the Second World War, when rationing was over and luxuries like candy were once again readily available, that trick or treat finally spread throughout the entire USA. As trick or treat replaced pranking, it seemed that the day now belonged almost entirely to prepubescents. Adults might occasionally dress in costumes for parties, but for the most part, they were expected to spend Halloween passing out candy to max children. How was it that even the young adults of Robert Burns' classic poem no longer actively celebrated the day? The answer to that may be best found in two unexpected areas: retailing and prohibition. All right, prohibition, not being able to get married, get drunk. The Edwardian era was prosperous, and leisure activities were plentiful. In the Victorian age, Halloween parties for youngsters had involved a considerable amount of adult participation. Invitations, costumes, and decorations were made days in advance and required the know-how of mothers and fathers. But as the 20th century dawned, paper goods companies catering to party-giving hostesses sprang up, and by the 1910s, companies like Beazle and B. Shackman had begun to produce and import pre-made decorations, taking some of the burden off adults. Dozens of small booklets outlining activities for Halloween parties were published, and the Dennison Company introduced a line of annual decorating guides called Boogie Books that gave detailed instructions on how to use Dennison products to quickly and attractively decorate for Halloween parties. Wow, the conditioning, the programming was heavy. You see, got people into the holidays. The programmings they were doing back in the days to get people into these holidays, it was hard. It was a strategy. Get them hooked. Now they're gonna buy all our products every year. We're gonna make millions. For about a decade, Halloween parties for adults were probably as popular as those for children, with the latter being held in the afternoons and early evenings to accommodate the latter gatherings for the adults. Then in 1919, the US Congress passed the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, and liquor was banned. or at least driven into the shadowy haven of speakeasies. Although Dennison continued to publish the boogie books, adult participation in parties took a serious blow when liquor became absent. You see, you need liquor. By this time, though, Halloween had become too popular to die easily. In the era between gas and electricity, between communicating via letters and the widespread use of telephones, one artistic form of staying in touch blossomed. Picture postcards. Postcards were printed, celebrating places, people, and events, and holidays were no exception. During this golden age of postcards, over 3,000 Halloween cards were produced, and the fantastical, colorful design of these cards worked to codify and solidify Halloween iconography. Jack-o'-lanterns were featured prominently, often anthropomorphized into playful vegetable-headed men. The seasonal merry orange fruit even appeared on some cards in the costume of a king, showing how the pumpkin had risen to prominence as Halloween's leading icon. All right, so this is one of those vintage postcards that seems to be a parody of the popular character Buster Brown. Huh. Are these minstrels, like Halloween, Halloween? The depictions of witches were plentiful, taking two forms. The classic wizened hag bent over a bubbling cauldron, attended by a faithful black cat and possibly servile imps. Or the lovely young, heavily sexualized witch. Huh. Yeah, that's what they do today, heavily sexualized, often dressed in crimson and seated on a broom. However, though the witch, black cat, and jack-o'-lantern all sound like images of modern Halloween, these cards still show a festival and transition, as many of them depict the fortune-telling games still being played at parties of the time. By the 1930s, another popular graphic art aimed at adults was capitalizing on Halloween, the pinup. Hollywood studios frequently presented their attractive starlets in provocative outfits as they posed for leading photographers, and for October, the ingenuous might be dressed as witches or pose with pumpkins. All right, here's another image, a youthful witch on Halloween postcard, right? Friendly, these so friendly. During the Second World War, the popularity of pinups increased thanks to overseas servicemen who were hungry for a glimpse of anything female, and Halloween pinups occasionally incorporated military imagery as well. Pinups, huh? That's like your original Playboy, magazine stuff. Overall, though, the period between the two world wars saw Halloween move through a cycle from adult and children's parties to pranking to ritualized trick-or-treat. Ritualized trick-or-treat. During the Second World War, rationing put a slight dampener on the home celebrations, but when the war finally ended, trick-or-treat had infiltrated virtually every area of America. Spurred on by a huge boom in developing new suburban neighborhoods, it had become the preeminent activity of Halloween. The fortune-telling customs of earlier eras were discarded, and the young people who had once enjoyed practicing those games were now confined to either the occasional costume party or handing out treats with older family members. In the 1940s and 50s, Halloween imagery and merchandising changed to reflect the new institution of trick-or-treat. The boogie books ceased publication in 1934, and the popularity of postcards declined sharply as telephones became commonplace, just as the heyday of pinups passed with the end of the Second World War. The new retailing trends catered to trick-or-treat, and so emphasized candy and costumes. In the past, costumes had been relatively simple homemade affairs, and had often utilized the image of the outsider. Costumes for gypsies, listen, hobos, bandits, and pirates were all easy to produce, requiring little more than old cast-off clothing and a few accessories. However, as manufacturing techniques changed in the 1950s and facilitated silk screening on cheap rayon or vinyl, and as plastic production allowed the creation of inexpensive, colorful masks, shop-bought costumes began to replace the traditional homemade outfits. The popularity of the new medium of television was exploding, and custom manufacturers played on this, licensing such beloved small screen figures as Howdy Doody, Kukla and Oli, and comedian Lucille Ball. Old favorites like witches and ghosts were still popular, but ghost costumes made simply from a white sheet was past, and mass-producing ghost costumes included ghoulish masks and costumes featuring stylized, colorful graphics. The new costumes were safer, too, made from flame-retardant materials. In the past, too many children had suffered as a result of parading in flowing costumes with lit lanterns, as was the case with the 4-year-old starlet Carol Ann Echelon, who had appeared in the Shirley Temple film, The Blue Bird, and who died in 1939 after the Halloween costume caught fire from a jack-o'-lantern. Wow. Did they sacrifice this child here, man? Unfortunately, every Halloween still sees reports of revelers who become burned victims after a homemade costume catches fire. You guys still there? Okay, we still here. Okay, let's go. Candy companies didn't really begin to target Halloween heavily until Trick or Treat. Candy had first made its appearance at American Halloween parties in the form of taffy that children could pull as part of the entertainment. The first mass-produced candies that were popular at Halloween were tiny sugar pellets that served mainly to fill festive, brightly colored containers. However, a candy first manufactured in the 1880s and finally mass-produced in the 1920s would soon become the preferred Halloween sweet, candy corn. Originally designed to imitate an individual corn kernel, its festive colors, orange, yellow, and white, and cone shape captivated consumers. The colors and corn shape connected it with autumn and harvest, and soon that connection led to the main, main candy purchase and event, Halloween. You guys know what they're talking about, that little candy, right? That looks like a cone, right? Candy corn is still a favorite American Halloween item, now produced largely by Bratch's Candy Company, who estimate that Halloween accounts for 3/4 of its annual candy corn sales. Candy corn's design has led to both a panoply of spin-off products for Halloween, including costumes and candles, and candy corn produced in the colors of other celebrations such as reindeer corn in red, white, and green for Christmas. Candy corn can even inspire its own day. 30th of October is, in the USA at least, National Candy Corn Day. Huh. As trick-or-treat's popularity exploded in the post-Second World War era, adults found it far easier to hand out individually wrapped sweets than the apples, nuts, popcorn, balls, and homemade candies that had been given out in earlier days. Despite the perennial popularity of candy corn, chocolate soon became the preferred sugary treat. By the late 2000s, Halloween, after lagging behind Valentine's Day and Easter for decades, finally became the top US holiday in the terms of chocolate sales, with sales in 2009 reported at 598 million pounds of candy, earning 1.9 billion in sales. Leading manufacturers Hershey's, Mars, and M&M not only began to produce new products specifically for the Halloween season, but for some time have been creating very specific Halloween-themed marketing campaigns. As Hershey's spokesperson Jody Cook notes, all holidays are important, but we strive to make people think of Hershey's when they think of Halloween. Every year we come out with new packaging, designs, or products to keep the excitement around what Hershey's is offering. So you guys know what they're talking about, right? Like how it's been commercialized so much, right? All these holidays, right? By the 1950s, other industries had begun to capitalize on trick or treat as well. Grocers printed branded trick or treat bags. Meat producers gave out kits and booklets that included cutout masks. Motion pictures and television companies produced Halloween cartoons and episodes, and even adult products like cigarette featured trick or treat and Halloween imagery in their magazine and newspaper print ads, all right? So somebody said, who made candy corn? I don't think you're supposed to actually eat any candy. Like sugar in general is really bad for you. Like that's why they call it. That's why I say, is this a treat or is it a trick? Put it in reverse. Two of the most popular accessories for any trick or treating child were the jack-o'-lantern, treat collector, and the noisemaker. In the past, children venturing between houses on a dark October night might have carried a small papier mache jack-o'-lantern holding a candle within. By the 1950s, trick-or-treaters in need of illumination could be equipped with plastic battery-operated pumpkins that also serve as treat collectors. Finally, the illuminated aspect of the plastic pumpkins was dropped altogether in favor of a large, lightweight treat container. Noisemakers were the descendants of the tic-tac, where earliest sound-producing toys had largely been homemade out of wood. The horse fiddle, which consisted of a wooden wheel with a 405 wooden slat spun around it, was another popular creation. The new noisemakers were mass-produced on metal and featured eye-popping graphics and vivid hues. Trick-or-treaters had the option of very loudly announcing the arrival at a house by shaking a rattle, banging a tambourine, blowing a horn, squeezing a clicker, or cranking a ratchet. Man, good thing they didn't do that. They didn't keep doing that because that would be noisy, man. Carl B. Holmberg, an associate professor of popular culture at Bowling Green State University, has suggested that noisemakers provided children with ritual empowerment by allowing them to produce the irritating loud sounds they were normally forbidden from making. Holmberg also indicates that the use of Halloween noisemakers faded as they were supplanted by atmospheric sounds, that is, homeowners who began to include pre recorded sound effects and spooky music with their seasonal jar display. Yeah, I remember, guys, as a trick or treater as a child, in Boston, I used to get a lot of candy in my neighborhood, like a lot of it. Was my neighborhood was one of the spots people used to come to trick or treat because it was like more of a neighborhood than just like a city setting or like a apartment building complex, like it was like home. There was like houses and it's little streets, so it's like a lot of little streets to go on and a lot of houses, doorbells to ring. So like my cousins in another part of Boston used to come to my neighborhood to do it because yeah, they was just more into it. I don't know. The people they were more into it. Homeowners were more into it. Anyways, but yeah, I remember the music is what they're saying. People used to decorate and the music and all that. That's what he's talking about. People started really getting serious with it, right? However, the use of Halloween noisemakers has recently returned in the haunted attraction industry, as actors working in Halloween mazes are now frequently supplied with either simple noisemakers such as tin cans full of coins or higher tech devices like special gloves with steel plates. So, vintage Halloween clapper. Look at that. This is what they used to use. They used to make so much noise. Wow. Says noisemakers were not the only sign that trick or treat had not been entirely successful in stifling the prankster spirits. In the mid 20th century, a new phenomenon appeared, pranking on the 30th of October, the night before Halloween. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when or where this new custom began, but it's probably no coincidence that there are almost no references to it prior to the 1940s, when trick or treat arose, in other words. Displaced pranking found a new home on the 13th and under a variety of names, including Devil's Night, Goosey Night, Mischief Night, Cabbage Night, and Damage Night. There are 19th century British references to Mischief Night, but they refer to the 30th of April, not the 30th of October, even though the description is startlingly similar. As all kinds of mischief were then perpetrated. Water tubs were overturned, door handles tied securely, fast shopkeepers' signboards exchanged, and other unmentionable freaks performed until the establishment of regular police put an end to these vagaries. Mischief Night has more recently referred in Great Britain to the 4th of November, the night before Guy Fawkes Day. The name Devil's Night is now most associated with the city of Detroit, Michigan, where it led to massive instances of arson in the 1980s. Wow. 297 Devil's Night fires recorded in the city in 1984. Wow. Yeah, people doing insurance claims too, huh? In the mid 1990s, a combination of urban renewal and volunteer efforts brought Detroit's arson problem under control. But other cities have also reported multiple incidences of arson on the 30th of October, including some in Great Britain. Mischief Night, Devil's Night crimes have also recently been linked to racial tensions. Uh-oh. Trick or treat also had a positive side effect for at least one charity. In 1950, an American couple convinced a few neighborhood children to collect money for the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. We already talked about all that in part one. You got to watch it. The only one, too. I can tell you didn't watch part one. Got to catch it. We did. We did all that. Yeah. But we are going to more. Look, we're not even, this is a big book. Like, we might do some reading tomorrow on something else. Anyways, let's keep going. Guys, you got to try to catch up on the videos. I already told you, I've read almost everything before this. We're just finishing up chapter 3. Literally, we've read the introduction in the 3 chapters. Okay, so check it out. The UNICEF and the practice became, okay, so the UNICEF trick-or-treat program remains popular and has helped raise relief funds for such recent disasters as the Indian Ocean tsunami and Hurricane Katrina. UNICEF also touts the extraordinary empowerment and pride a child experiences while securing donations during trick-or-treating. Says certainly the empowerment aspect of trick-or-treat was a large part of why it became such a popular annual pastime for many children. Charity aside, for one night a year, American youngsters were allowed to put aside their usual identity, encouraged to become a beloved character, beloved, huh? Allowed to parade around after dark and make noise and be rewarded by adults. It's probably no coincidence that trick-or-treat shot to prominence in the 1950s, the same decade in which overprotective parents and crusading psychologists began to complain about violent comic books and rock and roll. Complaining about rock and roll, that rockety roll that came from the black folks. Yeah, Halloween guaranteed children at least a small release from repression, even if only for one night. All right, so here's the image, right? Costume adults, Beverly Hills, California. It says, so did what author David J. Skal has called monster culture. In October of 1957, Screen Gems released to a television a package of 52 horror films from Universal. The blanket title was Shock Theater, and the roster included such classics as Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, and The Wolfman. These are the original ones, right? A year later, an agent and horror movie collector named Forrest J. Ackerman began editing a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland, which featured short pieces on various horror films and was heavily illustrated with photos culled from Ackerman's extensive collection. Monster culture was generated, and soon Halloween was awash with Dracula, Frankenstein, and other monster movie masks and costumes. So you see how things get started, right, guys? You see how all these little things became Halloween, but they weren't always all together. You see all these little things we read about in the last 2 videos, like today and 4 days ago. A night out trick-or-treating often ended with returning home for a monster movie, and monster culture also led to such influential Halloween works as Bobby Boris Pickett's hit song Monster Mash of 1962, and the rise of the horror show host or hostess. Monster culture has also contributed heavily to Halloween haunted houses, and has even resulted in one attraction dedicated solely to the classic movie Monsters. Cortland B. Hall's Witch's Dungeon Classic Movie Museum in Bristol, Connecticut, which features detailed life-size recreations of Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Lon Chaney Sr. as the Phantom of the Opera, and even Hall's great-uncle Henry Hall as the eponymous lead of 1935's Werewolf of London. Given trick-or-treat's almost universal suburban popularity, its emphasis on representations of outsiders, and the way it empowered its participants, it was perhaps inevitable that trick-or-treat was about to experience a backlash. Adults, it seemed, were unwilling to grant their children that power after all. In 1964, a New York housewife named Helen Fell was upset at the number of trick-or-treaters whom she thought were too old to be demanding candy. The hijack adults, yo, they're trying to They trying to be slick, yo. And handed them packages of dog biscuits, poisonous and buttons and steel wool. Uh-oh. Within 3 years, the urban legend of children being given apples with hidden razors and blades surfaced, and parents began to worry about Halloween. Oh man. Stories of anonymous cycles hiding everything from arsenic to LSD and Halloween treats became rampant. Yup. Especially following the case of 8-year-old Timothy Mark O'Brien, who died in 1974 after eating a cyanide-laced pixie sticks. You guys hear that? Wow, hey, man, I'm glad I never, thank the Most High, I never, ate 9:30. I hope I didn't eat 9:30. Like we never know. Like we kids, are those ain't watching us. We trust in everybody, so you gotta be careful with all that stuff. Make sure it's packaged and stuff at least, guys. You know. So that little Timothy murder was eventually linked to his father. Oh, eventually it was his dad, though, right? Ronald Clark O'Brien didn't matter in the public imagination. The fear of the madman who was out to poison children on Halloween had already been introduced. Wow. Trick or treat, however, refused to die. Alternatives were soon found. Hospitals provided services on Halloween night to check children's candy, even going so far as to offer the use of their X-ray machines. Why would you want to put your candy on their X-ray? Shopping malls and merchants capitalized on the fear by giving out Halloween treats and promoting a safe environment for children. Local zoos created trick-or-treat events with stations set up around the grounds to provide different treats, and educational programs taught children to throw away any unwrapped treats, including apples and nuts. As trick-or-treat became more gentrified, folklorists and sociologists heatedly debated its merits. In his essay Trick or Treat, Pretext and Context, Todd Tuleja notes how children now often custom themselves in the packaging of a favorite food or product, and adds, far from encouraging communalism or redistribution, the ritual certifies and even models competitive vigor. The successful trick-or-treater is a budding entrepreneur whose packaging and letterwork have provided personal income. If by the 21st century the average American child couldn't even explain the trick part of the phrase trick or treat, they didn't even know what to trick. Nobody knows, even today, like, what does it mean? What do you mean trick? What do you mean you're tricking me? Right? What you mean you're tricking me? Hold on, guys. Okay. This was not the case in Britain. As trick or treat began to increase in popularity in Britain, so did Franken. In fact, in 2004, the British supermarket chain Asda decided to ban sales of eggs to teenagers in the weeks leading up to Halloween. So I remember eggs. We would always get eggs on Halloween, man. we'd we'd even get the eggs, guys, and like let them rot a little bit, like weeks before, bury them, and then unbury them on Halloween, ready to throw them at people. That was messed up, right? Or people's houses. That was bad. That was bad. I participated and followed other bad kids, yeah. We've said that we're going to be more vigilant and we're not going to be selling eggs to under 16, stated spokesperson for the giant retailer. All right, hold up, guys. Damn, there's still a lot to go. All right, let's see. I might get tired soon, but let's see. Continue. It says here, Halloween for adults. As trick-or-treat was beginning to decline, or at least to be brought under corporate control, other factors were also beginning to tilt Halloween celebrations back towards focusing on adults. Many of the baby boomers who had been so fond of trick-or-treating as youngsters, specifically those who had been children in the 1950s, the golden age of trick-or-treat, seemed reluctant to give up celebrating it. And in the 1970s, as people of color, women, and gays sought equal rights, Halloween was inevitably pulled into the quest for progress. Yeah, this messed how they put people of color in those same as some, but that's a whole different thing, you know. But anyways, Halloween has had a long, difficult history in regards to non-whites, especially African Americans. In the 1920s, when African Americans were stereotyped as easily frightened and superstitious, Halloween books suggested parties, costumes, and decorations featuring darkies. Oh my gosh. Mami or Rastus. Wow, racist, right? Even Halloween books aimed primarily at children perpetuated racist stereotypes. 1936's Halloween Fun Book, which features recitations, plays, songs, and games for children, includes a poem entitled A Darkie's Halloween. Look at this. Look at this, guys. Wow. This is from the Jocular Jenks of Cornelia Kink's series of postcards. Grandpa don't say that his face it I'm old, so I've gave him this new one in hopes he won't scold. Wow. They were so racist, right, back then, when they were disfranchising you. So that's from 1907. So we're talking about a poem called A Darkie's Halloween, written in exaggerated dialect and depicting a pair of African Americans as two little darkies half dead with fright, who had forgotten 'twas Halloween night. Uh-oh. Damn, the Ku Klux Klan, when brought before Congress in 1921, tried to equate their tall, pointed calls to Halloween mask. Wow. They were using that as an excuse to go out, yo, in their Ku Klux Klan costumes, right? In 1965, herein they stated that their tactics of harassment and vandalism should always have a humorous twist and should be in the nature of Halloween pranks. Throughout the 20th century, there are incidents of Halloween rowdyism that led to crimes perpetrated by whites against blacks. Sometimes, as in the Halloween murder of young African American man in Corinth, Mississippi in 1959, months of racial violence and tension followed. Halloween racism continued into the 21st century. In 2001, white students at Auburn University in Alabama held a Halloween party in which they dressed as members of the Ku Klux Klan and staged the lynchings of other white students in blackface. Wow. After they posted photos on the internet, and 185 students were suspended. One incident, that's in 2001, right? One incident from Southern California's Long Beach area put a different spin on Halloween racial tensions in 2006. On Halloween night, three white women aged between 19 and 21 who were visiting a neighborhood known for its extravagant Halloween decorations were attacked by a number of black teenagers who hurled pumpkins and racial epithets. Eventually, 8 defendants were convicted of felony assault with a hate crime enhancement. A ninth was convicted only of assault and sentenced to probation and house arrest. So they showed one example, right? But there's so many more examples of white folks, Anyways, hate is hate. It's bad either way. Let's not be like the hateful people, guys. Let's not be like that. Let's be the bigger person. Show them how to be humans. Halloween and gay culture, wow. However, it seemed to have been a far more convivial mix. The celebration, of course, had always been a sanctuary for cross-dressers, right? A lot of people take advantage, these cross-dressers, to dress up how they want, like women and all that, or whatever. Note, for example, these lines from Charles Frederick White's poem, Halloween of 1908, the women dressed in men's attire. The small girl to quench her desire, to get into her brother's pants. Wow. By the late 1930s, nightclubs around the US were holding Halloween contests for female impersonators. However, it wasn't until the 1970s, just a few years after the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village, a pivotal moment in the history of the gay rights movement, that the Greenwich Village parade began and quickly brought gay participation in Halloween into the spotlight. Oh, they love their Halloween, right? I know. I'm talking, yeah, anyways. In 1991, in an essay about the parade, folklorist Jack Kugelmass noted Halloween's recent revival as an American adult festival speaks less to the possibility of religious enchantment than it does to the license the event provides. And certainly in the 1980s, the village Halloween parade emerged as a decadent festival of Mardi Gras-like proportions, all right? Decadent. All right, now they're getting really nasty with it, right? Now they're doing a whole other thing with it. Now you're being, yeah, you went extreme with the gay pride, right? Begun in 1973 by puppeteer Ralph Lee, the parade's proximity to Christopher Street, the heart of New York's gay culture, practically ensured that gay participation in the event would grow. On any given Halloween among the parade, 60,000 marchers will be drag queens. Large articulated puppets, marching bands, and every conceivable custom from gladiators to religious figures to giant walking condoms, all right? Like I said, it gets crazy, it gets stupid. The event, which draws 2 million attendees and is viewed on television by another million, Why do they show that stuff, right? Built itself as the nation's largest public Halloween celebration, right? But it's mostly about gay pride, right? And has become a major cultural landmark for New York. In recent years, the parade has sought to convey a more family-friendly image, emphasizing a safe, celebrative environment. But gay-oriented Halloween celebrations have hardly been confined to New York. Southern California's West Hollywood began its own carnival. Of course they did, right, in Hollywood in 1987. And the Halloween event now draws 500,000 visitors. The community blocks off a lengthy section of Santa Monica Boulevard and holds live musical performances and contests, although most of the festivities are confined to gawking at the amazing array of costumes. San Francisco's history of gay-themed Halloween celebrations has been somewhat more troubled. All right, more troubled. They get really nasty with it, right? Yeah. Prior to the 1980s, most of the festivities involved drag queens and their escorts going from bar to bar to display their complicated costumes. However, as the event migrates to Castro Street and grew in size, so did the attendance of the F-bashers, right? Or anti-gay protesters. The city tried to counter this by offering its own official party, which only resulted in two distinct celebrations occurring simultaneously. Unfortunately, the Castro celebrations continued to result in violence, and after a gunman opened fire in 2006, wounding 9, authorities began to practice a zero-tolerance policy on Halloween night. Another group of French, another group under French of American culture has also claimed Halloween for itself. They're talking about Wiccans, all right, and neo-pagans, witchcraft, in contrast to the stereotypical, largely Catholic and medieval portrayal of the witch as a minion of Satan. Modern witches who return to the root word Wicca when they name themselves tend to follow a belief system that is benevolent, centered in earth worship and free of infant sacrifice. All right, that's the hijack. There are also a wide variety of other neo-pagan beliefs, all of which are polytheistic and which include shamanism, Druidism, and systems based on Norse or Egyptian beliefs, meaning Hermetics. It all goes back to Hermetics, guys. The modern neo-pagan movement first began to organize in the 1960s and came to public awareness with the publication of Margaret Adler's influential study, Drawing Down the Moon, 1979. Because the term neo-pagan encompasses so many different belief systems, there are a wide range of practices on the 31st of October. Halloween is a major festival for most neo-pagans and may be referred to as Shadowfest. Ancestor Night, or Samhain, is typically a New Year celebration, although some groups such as Druids may reserve the winter solstice for that occasion. For Wiccans, the 31st of October is one of the 8 major Sabbats. Look how they call it, a Sabbath. They call it, the hijack is hijack. The hijack is real, guys. The hijacks is real, that's what I'm saying. I know a lot of you are down with this stuff. I know. I know a lot of you are still down with this stuff. I get it. Hey, man, but the hijack is real. So they call it one of their major Sabbats, huh? And is celebrated with a ritual that acknowledges both presence of the ancestors, right? Ancestor worship, which is not something we're supposed to be doing. I know a lot of you stuck on that too. When our ancestors honored and praised the Great Spirit, put the Great Spirit first, the Most High first. That's what our ancestors did, not their ancestors. Yeah, they acknowledged their ancestors, but they didn't praise them and leave out the Most High like a lot of you guys do. A lot of you guys do listening right now. I know you do. You forget. That's all you talk about. Ancestor, ancestor, ancestor. So, the presence of ancestors and transfer power from the mother goddess, who rules during summer, to the god, who will hold sway until the following Beltane, 1 of May. Wiccans may also incorporate modern Halloween iconography, such as the jack-o'-lantern, into their ritual and follow the more solemn observation with a festive party. Many neo-pagan groups celebrate around bonfires, and acknowledgement of deceased loved ones usually plays an important role in celebration. The spirits may be called to join in the festivities, or devices such as crystal balls and scrying mirrors may be employed in an attempt to communicate with those who have passed beyond. Most neo-pagan groups also have special foods, herbs, and stones associated with the festival. Wiccans also created their own Halloween Mecca, Salem, Massachusetts. That's their mecca, right? Celebrations in the world. I've been there. Salem's pretty weird, right? So Salem, Massachusetts now hosts one of the largest community-wide Halloween celebrations in the world. In 1692, Salem was the site of one of the most famous witch trials in history. 19 people were hanged as witches, and the trial served as the inspiration for Arthur Miller's classic commentary on the 1950s McCarthyism, The Crucible. All right, so we know the whole context and history and breakdown of the Salem witch trials. We know that the main person involved was an Indian, an Arawak Indian, who they made the main witch, who supposedly, they had her confess who the other witches, but they actually beat her to do that. They forced her to do that, and then the other people they picked, a lot of those people turned out to be, they were crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. They weren't down with the whole, they were practicing different things, and that's why they got deemed as witches. Yeah, that's a real history right there that you guys might have forgotten about. We read, right? Remember? Remember? You guys forgot who the Puritans and all these people were? Okay, okay. So Salem became inextricably linked with the word witch. And in 1971, Laurie Cabot opened the first shop in Salem specializing in Wiccan materials. In 1982, the Salem Chamber of Commerce inaugurated Haunted Happenings, a weekend-long celebration of Halloween that exceeded expectations. Now area hotels book up a year in advance, and Wiccans continue to be a significant part of the event. Salem has built on the notion of being a magical destination, especially at Halloween. That's the hijack. Christian Day, a witch and the owner of the Salem shop Hex, suggests that people are drawn to Salem at Halloween because they want magic in their lives. Oh, really? You want magic in your lives, huh? You want that type of magic in your life? The Haunted Happenings now extend for the entire month of October and include tours, cruises, film screenings, street markets, celebrity appearances, seances, magic lessons, and trick-or-treats for children. Performed excerpts from the Crucible and Samhain rituals on 31st of October. Samhain rituals. All right, get part one so you can know what those are. So you can see how crazy those were too. The Haunted Happenings website also lists year-round Halloween attractions in Salem, which include museums, galleries, and tours. The adult reclamation of Halloween that took place in the 1970s culminated not with a group based on ethnicity, sexual orientation, or religious belief, but with a single film. All right, listen. In 1979, a low-budget thriller grabbed moviegoers all over the world by the throat. John Carpenter's Halloween, remember the movie Halloween, man? That's what made it so popular. Did not just become one of the most successful independent films ever made and the progenitor of a whole new subgenre, the slasher film, but also presented Halloween in such a terrifying light that it was a wonder anyone would want to celebrate it after seeing the film. Carpenter's movie, based on ideas by producer Irwin Yablans and a script Carpenter co-wrote with Deborah Hill, created two iconic characters. Michael Myers, the silent killer who escapes from a mental institution during Halloween and wreaks havoc on his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, and Laurie Strode, the virginal and resourceful final girl who manages to survive Michael's rampage. The film played not only on its viewers' affection for Halloween by incorporating pumpkins, costumes, masks, popcorn, scary movies on television, children in suburbia, but whereas films like Steven Spielberg's E.T., the extraterrestrial, right? Remember that movie? Painted Halloween with a warm, nostalgic glow. Halloween turned beloved icons into signifiers of terror. A young boy's clown costume was now what the pre-adolescent Michael Myers wore on his first massacre. A jack-o'-lantern wielded a knife on the film, one-sheet poster, and in the strangest and funniest twists, a rubber mask of Star Trek actor William Shatner became a killer's menacing disguise. Halloween spawned not only its own sequels and remakes, but an entire cycle of holiday horror films, including My Bloody Valentine, April Fool's Day, and of course Friday the 13th. None of those films, however, could boast such added use of festival imagery or such impact on the celebration they purloined. Throughout the 1980s, trick-or-treat continued to limp along, but there was no question that Halloween had arrived as an adult festival. In 1983, America's third-place beer company, Coors, decided to counter their competitors' sales on Super Bowl Sunday and Memorial Day by creating a new beer holiday. Their first two Halloween campaigns, which featured the forgettable Beer Wolf and Silver Bullet Bar, were hardly runaway smashes. But in 1986, they hit on the formula for success by hiring Elvira, the curvaceous horror movie hostess, played by comedian Cassandra Peterson, right? Remember her, guys? Remember her movie? I remember her movie used to come out on Halloween. Fueled by life-size cardboard cutouts of Elvira, which were frequently stolen by store employees, Coors sales surged, and by 1995, Elvira had gained the moniker Queen of Halloween. Thanks to the Coors Elvira campaign, Halloween had soon surpassed Super Bowl Sunday and St. Patrick's Day in beer sales. Halloween wasn't only being reclaimed by urban adults, however, suburban homeowners were also making it their own by investing heavily in decorations. In the past, decorations had been simple and handcrafted. A few carved pumpkins, perhaps a scarecrow, and some hay bales, more representative of Halloween as harvest celebration than a horror celebration. And some cutout figures had been the extent of most yard displays. Companies like Beazle and Dennison offered a small yearly selection of cutout figures. Black cats, skeletons, and witches were the most popular. Banners and window decals. A few enterprising souls went further, adding some hanging ghosts made from sheets, tombstones carved from wood or styrofoam, or for the very ambitious, actual mannequins turned into monsters or corpses. But for the most part, Halloween lagged far behind Christmas in terms of home and yard decorations. But in the 1980s, as Halloween surged in popularity with adults, it also became more commercialized. Extravagant decorations began to appear in drugstores and supermarkets, and decorations got a big boost in 1983 with the appearance of Halloween seasonal stores. That year, a San Francisco dress shop owned named Joseph Marver, or owner, sorry, decided to fill in his October slump by offering costumes, and the business was an immediate hit. The following year, he rented a temporary space in his mall, and his sales went through the roof. Thus were born the seasonal spirit Halloween stores, which Marver sold to Spencer Gibbs in 1999, and which operated over 900 stores in 2011. Wow. Although Marver started with costumes, the spirit stores and other seasonal Halloween stores soon expanded to include home decorations, and homeowners began to take same interest in Halloween decorating that they had traditionally shown at Christmas. Adult interest in Halloween was also spurred on by the mass merchandising of such popular media franchises as Star Wars. Remember Spirit? Star Trek, and of course Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and soon parents could dress their tot in a Smurf's costume and decorate their yard with a realistic life-size figure of Freddy Krueger. By 1999, almost 30% of America's consumers spent money on Halloween decorations, and in 2001, Americans spent nearly $1 billion on them. Okay, it's big business, got you spending. Many of these home decorators weren't just creating a casual display in their yards. Instead, they were putting on actual walkthrough shows with miniature versions of mazes that had begun to appear during the Halloween season in the 1970s. And as homeowners began to produce more and more elaborate seasonal displays, so did the more professional maze producers. In fact, what no one foresaw in the 1980s or even in the early 1990s was another transformation in Halloween that was just around the corner. By the 21st century, Halloween would still be celebrated with trick-or-treat parties and yard decorations, but it would also become virtually a global industry. A global industry. Here. Got a lot of his Dia de los Muertos. I think tomorrow we might do this one, all right? Dia de los Muertos. Since it is tomorrow. All right, I think I'm gonna leave it there for now. All right, we read a lot, almost 3 hours here. Yeah, actually 3 hours. Damn, I should have stopped a long time ago. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and let it go right there, guys. I hope you enjoyed the reading, man. I mean, there was a lot of good reading and information that most people don't have no clue about it when it comes to Halloween in those last two videos, all right? So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me see. All right. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and learning with me. about this holiday, the history behind it, I hope you understood in the last two videos, what's going on. All right. But I appreciate you guys coming through and listening to me read for almost 3 hours. Appreciate you guys. It's not easy doing that actually. Yeah, you know. Yeah, that's why we inform the people, Texas. We inform the people so they can know what they're practicing and participating in and have a history. And if they still want to do it, that's on them. But you know, yeah, they got to know the history behind things, have context, right? Anyways, appreciate you guys coming through again. I'll let you go now. You might have to go trick or treating. You probably going trick or treating. You're adults dressing up. I get it. All right, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. All right. I appreciate everybody that came through. Hope you enjoyed it. All right. Please like and share the video. All right. Appreciate everybody. Much love and respect, man. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.